ferocious.
Historical precedent. We've never seen this before.
Could this be the end of the world?
75 years later.
Where have I seen this before? Here it is.
It's an outrage.
There we go.
Wow.
All right. So that was pretty fun, right?
Yeah, especially I didn't realize I was going to see Bill O'Reilly or hear Bill O'Reilly so early in the live stream. The intellectual giant has come.
Although that
so
was
soon.
the epic rap battles version
Edition.
of it.
Wonderful.
So hello and welcome everyone, and please welcome William C. Fox, whose channel is linked in the description if you are on YouTube. He's also streaming on his channel, so welcome his audience to the Cynical Historian as well. I'm Dr. Joe Hall Patton, or Cypher on my channel, and I just realized that we don't have the little name tag things in the corner.
I don't know my own name, so that would be extremely helpful if you could get those up.
That is weird. It's supposed to always be there.
Yeah.
Actually, I don't see the option. What the heck? Yeah. Oh, show displayed. There we go.
Hey. Oh, that's
All right.
who you are. Okay. God. Thank God.
Boy,
I was flying blind.
Some of you might remember Will's been on the channel quite a few times. We've had lots of discussions, and in fact, we've collaborated a few times too.
Yeah, we have.
And King is now singing the song of his people over there.
My cat is to the left and may sing the song of her people as well at some point.
He doesn't like it when I talk too loud, which is funny. Oh, here
That's
he
cute.
is.
Hail the king.
What prompted this discussion that we're going to have today is a video that Will did on presidential power and whether or not it retracts, and kind of discussing, like, from a more poli-sci perspective, what all of these changes that we've been seeing with the current president, and what it means for presidential power as a concept. So the larger question that I hope to answer today is simply, does presidential power only expand, or can it retract? And while it seems like a simple yes or no question, as we'll get into, it is a very complicated one. But do you have like a quick answer?
I have I won't preempt the final answer, but I will give a glimpse, which is to say, one is I hope that it retracts. and then the real answer, though, is actually two-faced from me. I have two answers to the question, which I think gives a little preview of what you said, which is that it's a little complicated rather than a yes or no binary.
Yeah, I'm pretty much the same. But I'm also like, you know, I don't see how after all this there's kind of a there is like a breaking point with presidential power where if we get so far, it may not be able to retract.
Yes. And that is
so-
the fine line that is going to be walked by even folks with a liberal, and I don't mean left wing in that sense, I mean classical liberal disposition. If you believe in like the liberalism of the Enlightenment or things like this, even people who advocate that wholeheartedly have to contend with some realities right now. I was talking with a professor, Stephen F. Knott, not too long ago, who's thought about these things quite a bit in terms of the presidency. And he was like, this is what I want, but is it going to happen? I don't know. And he was a very, classically liberal minded man. It's a really challenging time to be thinking about these things. It's also why it's exciting to be talking about them right now.
Yeah. And so and we'll get into the more present stuff, but this is, I wanted to take a more historical approach from in comparison to I'm not saying that your video wasn't historical, but it was more of a poli-sci perspective.
Yeah, it felt natural to me for the first time in a long time, actually.
Yeah, I mean, like your channel is often very you were a poli-sci major.
Yeah, I've been all over the place in my content, but in terms of my academic background, it's poli-sci. It's been undergrad poli-sci. My master's degree was a mix of public policy and political communication. There's obviously a mix of like political theory in there and classes on the presidency scattered throughout. And I received quite a broad theoretical training on the presidency and its comparisons to things like the prime ministerships that you would place like the United Kingdom.
Yeah, well, that would be bringing in a certain figure
yes,
in terms of theory.
Anybody else in the room who's written a dissertation or any spirits with us who've written dissertations on parliamentary democracy, please join the live stream. Yes, so and that's actually why I was excited to get that message from you asking to have this conversation, because I think taking what my video is kind of a riff with a little bit of a literature review kind of shoehorned in, and combining it with a historical perspective, maybe a dash of historiography, I think will be quite fun.
I just got to point out, K-Zone.
Yes. In fact, 你好，我是 Timo Cipher.
Wait, you actually...
No, I don't. I literally just said, hello, I am Timo Cipher. And that's all I got. That's my Chinese. I'm also, that's my Timu Chinese. Timu Mandarin. Yeah. I thought I was Timu Leon Trotsky. That's what I get sometimes.
Oh, I get that. Yeah, I always have, I remember one of my favorites on that is like, never trust anything from somebody who looks like a Trotsky, like a Trotskyite or something like that.
I know we have substance to discuss, but last thing on Timu is that I recently received a sponsorship offer. It was clearly spam in my inbox from a company that was like Tima, Tema. And I was like, oh, there is a Timu called Tima. We are like the snake's eating its tail kind of stuff going on here.
I thought the Timu for Timu was Alibaba Express. So to get back on topic, to give context to this question and give it more of a historical bent, we first have to, of course, discuss what is presidential power, how it came about, and what are and how each of the things in it eventually came about. So first there's the constitutional powers, right?
Yes.
You have a quick way to summarize that?
Sure. Well, it's Article 2, not Article 1. Article 1 is the Congress, and I think that alone tells us a lot about the role of the presidency in relation to the other main branch of government when it comes to creating law. and executing law. The quick answer is that the president has a veto power. It is a question about how it should be used, but we're being brief. He is the commander in chief of the armed forces, but he can't declare war. The Congress does that. He gives the State of the Union address on the, how the country's doing to Congress, but is it written? Is it in person? Is he whipping up the Congress? Is he just giving them a status update? Open to interpretation.
And
He's
it
supposed
wasn't
to
actually given like in person until some early presidents did give speeches. I think
Jefferson stopped it.
it was
And then-
Jefferson who stopped it.
I believe so. And then
Um,
it didn't return until our favorite president, Mr. Wilson. Faithfully executing the law is in the Constitution for the presidential powers, though having executive power vested in an executive is also in there, which might be contradictory. He's the head of state, and theoretically, I don't think this is a constitutional power, but he appoints ambassadors that are then given power through advice and consent of the Senate. Same with SCOTUS. So he has influence over diplomacy and the interpretation of law. But again, all of these things are put in contention with the other branch of government. The only exception being the power to pardon, which is a wholly unchecked power of the president, with the exception of impeachment, if I am remembering correctly.
Yeah, well, there's like an entire constitutional argument about whether or not impeachment can actually because there's some parts of impeachment that can actually like result in a death penalty if they want. Basically it's up to the Senate to impose a sentence. And like theoretically that could be commuted by the president through his pardon power.
Yeah.
Which
it gets a little weird, and we might be getting a little too deep in the weeds too early, but it does kind of go back to English constitutional law and the idea of parliamentary sovereignty, excuse me. In theory, the parliament in the United Kingdom could legislate that everyone in the UK from henceforth must be a redhead, right? And like, is that feasible? No, but theoretically, the theory of parliamentary sovereignty says that the legislative part of government is the supreme part, and so therefore it would trump anything that an executive might do. We really have to get in the weeds to discuss it, but I think that it's suffice it to say that the interplay between branches of government, and in this case, the interplay between the American presidency, the American Congress, the American presidency, and the American courts is an important interplay. And it's becoming quite lopsided, which I think is the pretext for our conversation. These constitutional things are being called into question.
So the main thing of checks and balances are, that's kind of the thing that has been most eroded under this current presidency. But many of those checks and balances have been eroded over time. For instance, there's war powers that are given, and this is not something that's like something that a lot of people like to talk about war powers and emergency declarations as like a post World War II thing, but it's like the quasi-war happened in under Adams, and that was the reason for the Alien and Sedition Acts and whatnot. So they really gave away a lot of their power. Congress gave away a lot of their power to the presidency as early as the 1790s, and Washington ordered the creation of the U.S. Army in 1791 completely unilaterally. As a response to the Hamar expedition or something like that, an expedition in 1790 that against Little Turtle and Velvet Shirt. I can't remember what his name was. But Little
I did not know
Turtle's-
that. That's interesting.
Yeah, the Northwest Indian Confederacy kept on kicking the America's ass, and the funny thing is, U.S. Army formed under that, and then faced its worst defeat, depending on how you define it, ever. In later on in 1791, St. Clair's defeat, as it's called.
And I think of the Whiskey Rebellion when I think of Washington's use of executive power and that latent potential in the American presidency to wield power.
Yeah.
And I know we'll get to this a little later, but Washington, when we're discussing people who perhaps wielded power in a virtuous way and knew its limits and knew its uses, being a fallible human, I think he qualifies in that category. And I think that's an important distinction to make, is the latent powers of the presidency, to a certain extent, rely on the person who wields those extreme powers' ability to know whether this is the right circumstance to use them or not.
Yeah. And, and Congress has constantly kind of handed power over to the presidency, especially when it comes to war powers.
Mm-hmm.
So I actually there are a list of things that they have been handed over the years. So Washington created a large standing army. Not a large standing army, an army, but before World War II, and this is, I'm just quoting from an old episode because I'm much more eloquent when I have it written down.
Oh,
Before World
aren't we
War
all?
II,
Yeah.
the U.S. didn't have a large standing military, nuclear weaponry, or extensive secret agencies. World War I brought about the ability to create propaganda, monopolize and nationalize industries, send detectives, and prosecute espionage and sedition. After the Spanish-American War, there were not just American territories, but official colonies, or what is now termed unincorporated territories, where the U.S. Constitution does not apply. The Civil War brought about federal enforcement of individual rights, though that largely ended after Reconstruction for another century.
And to your point about Congress giving away powers, a lot of the times Congress gave away powers, it was masked as an attempt to keep them. So the War Powers Act was an attempt by Congress to say, we have the war power, and to put a limit on the president.
Yeah.
That would potentially expand the conflict in Vietnam, contrary to the wishes of Congress, or conduct undeclared wars without a war powers resolution, as in lieu of a declaration of war. But ironically, what the War Powers Act did is basically tacitly tell the president, you can basically freelance for 30 to 60 days.
Yeah.
Another example of that is the National Emergencies Act, which was an attempt to curtail some of the abuse of power of Richard Nixon in using emergency powers without a justifiable reason.
Yeah.
And what actually happened in the wake of the National Emergencies Act is that a lot of presidents took that as an invitation to just declare an emergency, to follow the procedure, if not the spirit of that law, in order to do things from the Oval Office that were not in comportment with the Constitution. Last example would be the Impoundment Control Act of 1974. Again, it's like, oh, there was an abuse of power. The president is impounding. They need to justify themselves. But really, what it did was create clouds, muddiness for presidents to try to stop spending money Congress appropriates, and create an avenue for that behavior. So the irony of some of this handover from Congress is that it was framed as attempts to wrest back control that the author Arthur M. Schlesinger in 1973 called the imperial presidency, the symptoms of imperial presidency. And really that book focused on the war powers, but
we've got a whole section on that.
Yes.
But there was an attempt, and there were attempts to curtail power, but ever since the beginning, war has always been a useful way to expand presidential power. And you had things like the Whiskey Rebellion. The first use of the Insurrection Act was against people smuggling across the border in what is now Maine. Although at that point it was Massachusetts.
They threatened a military action during the nullification crisis under Andrew Jackson. It didn't come to blows, but Jackson said, "Are you ready to incur its wrath?" referring to federal power for disunity in the Union.
Yeah, but there's also there was already precedent for that. That, he was just threatening to do what Jefferson had already done.
Yes.
And so there's, and we see the Insurrection Act used a few times during the Long Hot Summer in 1967 and the MLK riots in 68.
which is relevant because of some of the things that went on in Washington, D.C. with the National Guard.
Mhm.
And currently, I just left the movie theater yesterday, and there were National Guardsmen at the bottom of the escalator for whatever reason. So it's all very real. Yeah.
How many of them are just kind of like don't have anything to do, so they're going to the movies too?
Yeah, I don't know. These folks look like they were patrolling, but maybe that's a conversation
they
for
were
later.
armed?
I don't recall if these were armed. I do know that they were fully uniformed and they were looking around, and this was in a part of DC, Chinatown, where presumably if someone were to go into the police headquarters of DC and say, where would you like extra enforcement, that would be one of the places. Anyway,
yeah,
National Guard and insurrections is relevant.
Yeah, and the utilization of the National Guard for law enforcement is not unprecedented, but it is unprecedented when it's just like, I had one frickin' subordinate get mugged, and therefore I'm going to nationalize the entire
yes,
the entirety of DC. That's never happened.
And that's the difference between using power in circumstances when that power would be called upon for a reason, and then what this is, which is on one end of the spectrum performative, in that there is no grand crime wave to be solved, and on the other end of the spectrum is clearly not performative, but actually a precedent setting behavior for that troubles me, at least in a constitutional sense, should there be a contested election in any upcoming cycle.
Yep. And we'll get into the current situation, but I'm trying to to move away from the present.
Sure.
And the emergency declarations were always supposed to be limited in some capacity, but because of the nature of it just sitting on one man's shoulders to declare whatever the hell they want, if a president were to maliciously wield that power, it sets up a situation we have today.
Indeed.
So there's also a thing in your video that pertains to this section is the idea of progressivism as something that Trump is doing right now.
Yeah.
So explain that.
Okay. I must admit that I use the words conservative and progressive in that video loosely, but in order to explain why I believe Trump is using executive power in a quote unquote progressive way, we have to talk a little bit about Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson and their use of executive power. Teddy Roosevelt is famous and
the other Roosevelt too,
and the other Roosevelt and LBJ, on and on and on. But with the foundational guys here are Teddy, who believed that the Oval Office was a bully pulpit to conduct an agenda, to, like the conductor of an orchestra, tell the legislature what sort of things should be on the agenda and advocate for those things. And this sort of theory, though it sounds pretty natural to us today, is not really in comportment with the original concept of the presidency, the presider president. Even looking at someone like Hamilton, who's probably the most ready advocate of executive power during the founding, would say something like the veto power should only be used in a constitutional issue, as he explains in Federalist 73. So really, when Teddy Roosevelt makes this innovation in the idea of the presidency, it is in fact something new, even though it feels familiar to us today. We would be surprised if a president wasn't advocating an agenda, wasn't a big personality. And this sort of thinking gets its steroid injection from a man named Woodrow Wilson. Of course, he was writing some of his thoughts on how the president should behave prior to the presidency of Teddy Roosevelt. But eventually Woodrow Wilson
wrote a dissertation on it.
He did. Woodrow Wilson envisioned a presidency that really is operated a little bit more like a prime minister, in that they're almost in the legislature. If you are familiar with parliamentary systems, you know the prime minister is one of many legislature. He's just the prime legislature. The prime minister, he's in there, he's advocating government policy. And if you don't vote along party lines in a strict party system like that, you often have people with the job title whip, who really can evict you from the party, suspend your ability to call yourself members of the prime minister's political party if you don't go along with what he says. And Wilson sees these forms of whipping in parliaments as something that would be great if the president could do it within the Congress of the United States. If the president could be, quote, be as big a man as he can be and advocate an agenda that is then followed by the Congress in what he calls, quote, friction-free governance. Well, when Woodrow Wilson eventually comes to the White House, it doesn't go quite according to plan, but those intellectual foundations are certainly there. And as you referenced,
it really does come to fruition once World War I starts, though.
Yes. So in terms of things like the Committee of Public Information, the Bureau of Investigation run by Herbert Hoover, spying on dissidents, controlling...
So well, not Herbert Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover.
J. Edgar Hoover. Oops.
But
oopsie daisies. The other Hoover.
I've made the same mistake many times.
Yeah.
But actually, the Attorney General at that point really had the biggest power of it, and like A. Mitchell Palmer was. He came to power. He became Attorney General in 1919, so after the war. But like. He really wielded that power. And, you know, Wilson was kind of an invalid at this point.
His wife was maybe running the show.
That's not true. No, the main person who was really wielding power in the administration at that point was Jacob Colby. I'm forgetting his first name. Something Colby, Secretary of State.
The only Colby I'm thinking of is Elbridge Colby, the Undersecretary of State right now, I believe. But anyway.
But he also didn't come to power until, and this might actually be partially Edith's doing, is that Edith kind of forced out the previous Secretary of State because he'd been undermining Wilson's agenda. And she also had some like personal beef with him. And so he was out. And
right.
so came Colby.
The dynamics, another person who was in Wilson's
Colby.
government
Thank
that was
you,
an important person to reference is, oh, sorry about that. FDR.
Bainbridge Colby.
Bainbridge Colby. Thank you for that correction. FDR was, if I'm not mistaken, in Wilson's cabinet. And FDR, of course, was a reconstructive president. And really, the New Deal fundamentally changed that relationship between citizen and government. It altered the social contract. You can find a little bit about a description of kind of this dynamic in presidential leadership and political time. But the reason I'm bringing all this up is because a lot of presidents after Wilson pursued a legislative agenda in a style that would be recognizable to Wilson in his dissertation, or in a style that would be recognizable to Teddy Roosevelt. And this desire to be as big as man as he can be, to give citizens intimate access with the president, to basically give people the sense that their unfiltered democratic will is being enacted through the president of the United States, is something I'm identifying as the progressive agenda of Teddy Roosevelt and Wilson. And the way I'm using the word is that it is progressivism for my context, as long as the president is behaving in that way, regardless of the legislative agenda that he's advocating for, or the policy agenda he's advocating towards. So in this case, Donald Trump, who justifies a lot of his behavior, I don't want to get too lost in the presentism, but the use in my video of the word is in reference to the fact that President Trump often justifies overreach of being as big as man as he can be, of being that intimate, unfiltered democratic access for the people, in a way that I would describe as progressivism, as enacted by Teddy Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson.
He does talk a lot about a mandate, right? Like,
I will be your retribution is another key phrase.
That was literally his first campaign speech of in 2024.
Right. So the progressivism doesn't mean he is progressivism in this doesn't mean he's breaking up trusts or advocating for some progressive policy on, I don't know, reproductive rights. It's to say that he's enacting his agenda in a way that would be recognizable to Roosevelt or Wilson or the next Roosevelt or LBJ, on and on we go.
Yeah. And so the New Deal especially kind of began, there was that progressive kind of like hiccup in the early 20th century, but it really took the New Deal to give the president these kinds of executive powers of just administration, being able to start projects, fund businesses, expand or retract the economy based around like loans and stuff like that, all of which the president has executive authority over, and is written specifically into the legislation for it. So that is immense power.
Yes.
Though a lot of it and we'll get into it, but a lot of it is actually retracted from like FDR's time, where technocrats and nonpartisan
professional bureaucracy
has basically been given the reins over much of that. And that's a lot of the things that Trump is doing now, is kind of clawing that back.
That's totally true.
But
and it introduces an issue, which is that if you're going to do all these things, even if Congress wants the president to do all these things, as the New Deal Congress did for the most part, the problem that arises is that the president simply must be given some latitude to execute the law in a way that would have been unrecognizable to the founders, because his job has just gotten bigger. Whether you agree with the specific actions of the president or not, in this era, the presidency changes fundamentally and it's rebuilt, and you get these. There's a whole genre of political science, which I won't get into, but that describes the anatomy of White Houses after Lincoln, including like FDR's is often described as like the wheel of a ship with like all these different spokes going out, and FDR in the center. The Reagan White House is described with a different anatomy, with his troika of advisors. And so the presidency gets in this moment too big for its britches, regardless of your political disposition. And that introduces some of the issues that we're facing today, where, how far can a president go in controlling his branch of government? And so far it's only been his. So we use that phrasing, his branch. Yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. The expansion of the government itself, as in like the number of departments, number of agencies, and all that kind of stuff, is roughly equivalent with the expansion of presidential power, right?
With the exception of those latent emergency powers we spoke of earlier, definitely. The job description, if it was posted on LinkedIn or Indeed, would be lengthier, just as you describe, as the administrative state grows.
Yeah. And how many departments do we have now? Like 17?
Oh, Lord. I would have to ask Mr. Beat. Actually, funny enough, I almost had a thing open where he had said, but it was, I think it's easily above 100.
Oh, I said departments. Not
department. Oh, I don't know.
That's basically how many seats are in the cabinet, yeah,
it's a lot. Well, there's not 100, but there's a lot.
Yeah, I think it's like 17, 15, 15. And all agencies and bureaus technically fall underneath one of those departments. Though we have like weird, like private corporate, independent corporations like the USPS, and stuff like that, that are nominally independent.
It gets wonky, and it gets the idea that there is a administrative state, and in some ways, almost like when you look at the Federal Reserve and its place in American governance, it doesn't slot nicely into one of three branches. It's kind of its own thing, and that's a legitimate criticism of how some of this is expanded, and it's a legitimate target, I think, for people to at least question, almost every institution in our system of government has some sort of democratic will attached to it, even if it's filtered. So a good example would be the courts. The courts are not elected except in certain states, but the federal courts are not elected, but the people who choose those judges are. So they're selected in some way through the democratic will. And
they go through a confirmation process.
They're appointed by one branch of government, confirmed by another, et cetera, et cetera.
And even the officers in the military are all actually confirmed by Congress. But it's just like a big slate of names that are handed off to Congress to rubber stamp, basically.
Right.
But nobody. I mean, there's been a few times we've had confirmation hearings for people. I mean, like I was just working on an episode about red baiting. My longest episode. It's going to be over 2 hours. And
oh my god!
I'll
listen on one of my walks.
I got to the McCarthy stuff, and one of the parts of that is that one of his proteges freaking got drafted, and then they tried to get like special accommodations because he's a congressman and he does the confirmations and all that kind of stuff, and it turned into a whole thing. And that was the basis of the Army McCarthy hearings that ultimately brought him down, right? So like it was real interesting seeing that kind of check and balance happening, and it was completely outside of the president's control. In fact, the president at the time, right before the Army, basically the lead up to the Army McCarthy hearings, the president signed in a direct order, not an executive order, but a military order, to that they were no longer to testify unless fully subpoenaed. That no officer was to testify because McCarthy had like severely berated a general, and plus he'd gone after General Marshall, and
I think it was Herbert Hoover. That was just a joke. That's just a joke. This is we're misnaming people. Yeah.
Okay. So like the president was very much like hands off, and it was actually kind of cowardly about it, to be perfectly frank.
And if the president had chosen to intervene, it would be, we would argue probably in retrospect, part of the healthy interplay between the war powers that have been split between the Article 1 and Article 2 branches of government, the executive and the Congress. We'd say the Congress has the power to declare war, it has the power to oversight all this stuff, has perhaps parliamentary sovereignty. The president is given the commander-in-chief role. We should see how those things hash out when they're put against each other. That's, in my opinion, part of a healthy republic that would have been described through Federalist 10 from James Madison.
So that brings on the next thing, which is... for those who don't know, we did a previous collaboration, and my half was about presidential tyranny. Only went up to World War II purposely because basically every president under this definition would be considered a tyrant since World War II. But executive tyranny, by that definition, under the following the Federalist Papers and everything, was essentially overstepping one's boundaries and using executive authority beyond what is actually constitutionally permissible. Which that too has a long history, right?
It does. I'm reminded immediately of Cato 5, which I reference all the time. It was an anti-federalist argument that said these powers of the president would be ruinous. Do you not believe an American can be a tyrant? Do you really want to give someone this vested executive power in this way? And we've been contending with that since before the Constitution was ratified. We've seen the opposite of it before with the Articles of Confederation, where, I mean, can you even name, I mean, I know you can, but can the audience really name the person who was the chairman, the president of the, no. we had a feckless government prior to the
I
Constitution.
think I could only name like 4 of them.
I don't even know if I yeah. Anyway, that is an eternal in terms of the American government, eternal, which is not that long, but 250 years.
Actually, no, I don't think I could name any of them. Any of the presidents of Congress during the Articles of Confederation, because they didn't go into effect until 1781. So all the presidents of Congress I could name would be in the 1770s. So
you'd beat me in the trivia if that was a Jeopardy.
well, that's
category.
I mean, like some of them are easy, you know. You got like all right, John Hancock, of course.
Yeah.
But
I would have called him Hitchcock, but yes. Apparently I'm becoming more and more of a dad even though I don't have any children. I'm becoming more of a dad every day. I'm just like slightly misnaming everyone as this live stream goes along.
That's being a substitute teacher.
Yeah.
Where's AA Ron?
Yeah.
But like the but yeah, there was executive tyranny prior to the Constitution we have now, but not really like kind of necessarily so. We were fighting a war, you know. But like,
can I ask you if you use, because I rewatched the video today in preparation for our live stream. So you gave some examples and you mentioned, for example, I know that there was at least one example you gave where you said Lincoln was, in this case, practicing
explicitly tyrannical. Yeah.
So do you use the word tyrannical in a pejorative sense, like a classical sense, or do you use it as just a descriptor word without an emotional connotation? Just out of curiosity. Like, for example, if Lincoln's being tyrannical, is that bad?
Like, tyranny is necessary in some cases. You know, that's
right.
Like, I guess I'm not using it with a negative connotation, but I think it's still a negative connotation no matter what. But like, you know, with Lincoln, it was, you know, just that he didn't actually have the power to rescind habeas corpus, and so that was explicitly tyrannical. But Congress kind of like retroactively made it legal, although he then did it a few more times after the whole Baltimore riot thing. But you know, like imprisoning not F. Scott Fitzgerald. Oh, now I'm ruining names too.
I don't remember.
Francis Scott Key, the one who wrote the national anthem, imprisoning his son in Fort McHenry is
right. I would describe
quite
the
ironic
imprisonment. To skip ahead, I would describe the imprisonment of Eugene Debs in World War I tyrannical.
Oh yeah,
but I would not necessarily like. I guess the reason I brought up the question is because I think that the larger question when it comes to executive tyranny, unfortunately, is if we're talking about a genuine emergency situation, I don't know if the word tyranny applies. It becomes the fog of war. It becomes a more complicated question.
And then all the examples given, well, no, not all of them. You know, the poor treaty making under Jackson is one of the examples, and that's
awful.
Yeah,
undeniably so. Yeah.
Yeah, and it also very much internationally illegal. So it's and that's actually something that supersedes the Constitution, right? You know, is that you have to abide by treaties, and you have to make them in good faith.
I do think that well, we might once again be getting a little in the weeds, but I do think that the question of international law and its application gets a little dicey, but I understand the point, your broader point you're making. And funny enough, someone who would agree with the concept of, you know, sovereignty of borders would have been Woodrow Wilson, weirdly enough, in his internationalist vision. It gets a little mixed, funny enough, with Wilson, and that's not to get too lost again.
One thing that I think everybody can like about Wilson is that, you know, is his idea of self-determination. Whether or not he actually followed through with it is another matter entirely.
Right.
You know, he was a great orator, like no doubt about it.
The other question with Wilson's view of international relations is whether that framing of self-determination and community of nations, whether that was a disguise for more Thucydidean realpolitik that we or balance of power stuff.
I've never heard that.
Well, like Thucydides, like
I know
I
what you
don't
mean. Yeah,
I just but like sorry, I get pretentious sometimes when I riff. But the point I was trying to make is like basically was that paradigm sincere, or was that just masking the stronger do what they want by more complicated means?
Yeah.
Was the United Nations eventually, not the League of Nations, the United Nations eventually basically a front for the big five countries to impose their will on the rest of the world? Or was it a legitimate place to pursue the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? And that was the only distinction I was trying to make there. But I also realize I've taken us way off the beaten trail, so I'll stop.
We were talking about tyranny, and the definition there was that when a president supersedes his constitutional powers, that is executive tyranny. But basically every president since FDR and FDR included has done so. The Alien Enemies Act does not allow for the imprisonment of an entire race. Or I guess nationality is.
And FDR did that nonetheless, and that's a legitimate tyranny.
Yeah, and basically, you're going to be hard pressed to find, especially once the CIA comes about, you're going to be hard pressed to find anything that the CIA does that isn't unconstitutional. And the if they stuck to intelligence gathering, then fine. But operations are explicitly unconstitutional. They don't have the power to do operations, and yet they do it.
So here's a thought experiment, and maybe it's one we can punt to the end. But if a future president were to come in and impound funds from the Congress for the CIA in the name of abolishing these unconstitutional operations, would that be executive overreach, or would that be a good use of executive power? And I think that is perhaps like a fundamental tension that has to be addressed in the coming years with the use of these powers, is if there is going to be gridlock in Congress from now until the end of time, what shall we do?
Yeah. And so, but that's a question of like, it's a good question. I don't know if it would be, because impoundment is explicitly outlawed, but so is, CIA operations. So like, if those two butt heads, then it's just like
everybody's breaking the rule all at once.
Yeah, do two wrongs make a right?
Yeah, and I would argue, and I've been thinking about this, and part of the reason I was excited to talk to you is that I've been thinking about this with my video. I laid the seeds of the video to say, with power, you have to make choices. And if you are given power, you don't always have the privilege of dipping into the theory and being a purist. Sometimes you have to simply wield it. Mm-hmm. And that's why I'll never be president of the United States, because I never want, besides the fact that I'm deeply uncharismatic politically and would never be elected, also because I would never want to wield those kind of powers or have those sort of what ultimately become moral choices to make. But I do think that they're relevant to think about for people who do think about the good, capital T, capital G, and what a president might use their power for in an age of gridlock for the greater good, after some of it has been used for the greater bad, for unethical reasons.
And that's a good question. But in response to, bad tyranny, I guess, if you want to label it that, largely we saw a lot of tyranny under Nixon.
Yes.
So much so that he famously had to resign.
He did.
And
he inspired lots of legislation.
And in response to that, there was a definitive retraction in power. So, the framing of this entire stream is kind of false, because we know for sure that it can retract, and it has. executive power absolutely has retracted before. The anti-Nixon reforms are a prime example, though we are seeing those very reforms being used now for tyranny. Like with the tariffs under Trump, and trying not to be two presidents here, but it's those are being used under the emergency reform. Those are being instituted under the emergency reforms done to prevent Nixonian tyranny.
Yes, it gets a little interesting. I would put a little different spin on it. I think presidential power ebbs and flows. So I don't think the latent powers ever go away. And I think once let's call it a balloon, has expanded to a certain extent, it's a lot easier to expand it to that extent again in the future.
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of what we're seeing right now, is that executive power was filled to a certain extent. And we can see it, it depends a lot on the person, on the environment. I think you could make an argument that some of the presidents post-Reconstruction were the power simply moved to other places, to perhaps the Gilded Age, plutocrats, etc., or to the Congress, and then eventually, in the progressive era, perhaps move back towards the White House into the Great Depression. So that there's the ebb and flow, and the power. Then you're correct in saying the power does go away at times, but is it actually truly gone, or is it just lying in wait for the next person to come in and wield it? And that's the argument that I would make.
The iron fist can always fit back into the velvet glove.
Yeah.
The
scary.
I was reading a bunch of Nietzsche recently, so
little bedtime stories. Little Nietzsche.
Will to power is seems to be a fairly pertinent metaphor right now. But in previous instances of this, so for instance, one thing that we saw as a huge retraction in presidential power was the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878. Up until that point, it was perfectly fine to use the army as a constabulary force. That was actually perfectly normal. If you had some local trouble, you'd call up. No. You'd beep out a call to the local armed forces, or wherever they happen to be stationed, and then they just grab whoever they can, maybe a militia, maybe a freaking some Marines or something along those lines. It didn't matter. They just grab whoever they could and freaking come out and literally be part of a posse, like
a spaghetti western. You deputize people in your western, right? The sheriff goes into town and says, you're deputized, you're coming with me to solve the crime.
That still happens. That's actually still, posses are perfectly legal to form, and actually that's how sheriffs still function today. If they are doing any kind of investigation, they'll typically deputize some sort of investigative group, and that's the reason why the FBI even exists, is because of private detectives being too unwieldy to form a posse. So instead, we created the FBI. That's actually why it exists.
On this, because I have to admit that when I saw Posse Comitatus Act in the document, I wasn't as familiar as you are, and I had some questions. I was wondering, first, was it in response to railway strikes and the way that some of those were put down in that era? And then two, what do you think it has?
The end of Reconstruction.
Okay.
It was basically making Reconstruction illegal.
I see. So in that way, it was. That's how
Reconstruction functioned, was that the military was used as a constabulary force.
Mm-hmm. And so in that case, it brings up another question. The deep irony of that act then is that I think we would generally call the enforcement of Reconstruction under Ulysses S. Grant, for example, though it obviously was done imperfectly, we would call most of that virtuous, right? One of the big questions in American history is, what if Reconstruction went forward to its fullest extent? Yeah. And what the Posse Comitatus Act is theoretically a way of stopping the enforcement of civil rights, and
Quite literally, yeah.
quite literally. And so my question would be, is that the stopping of tyranny or the empowerment of tyranny? What the question of whether more or less power is vested is still
it is basically giving states rights.
Mhm.
And yeah, states do have rights, and that was relinquishing federal power to the states. And sure enough, they started instituting Jim Crow literally just a few years later.
Mhm.
Jim Crow only came about because of the end of Reconstruction. Now the Posse Comitatus Act was to make sure that it couldn't happen again, that Reconstruction couldn't happen again. It was kind of part of this what's called the corrupt bargain.
From the Harrison election.
Yeah, and there's a lot of debate on whether or not an actual bargain happened and yada yada yada. But but the fact is, troops were pulled out of the South. And the Posse Comitatus Act was passed. That was an explicit end of enforcing civil rights.
Mhm.
And basically that issue would not come up again until the civil rights movement of the post-war era. So
from a question of tyranny, however, and executive power, is it a good thing that act was passed? I guess is what I'm getting at. And would use of tyranny in order to enforce Reconstruction be tyranny? Would it meet that definition even if it broke rules about states' rights? When we look at the civil rights movement, that comes up, right? The at least explicit opposition to the civil rights acts are about states' rights, even though we all know that there's something else going on there.
It's about the states' rights to what?
To do
to
things
discriminate, right?
to enforce Jim Crow. But what I guess the point I'm making is that the superseding of federal law over state law in these cases, in my opinion, is not tyranny. And if a president were to enforce Reconstruction, or when presidents were trying to enforce Reconstruction, this was not tyranny. And I suppose what I'm trying to get at is that there is a gray area here where the good, the virtuous, can be enforced by things that technically break rules. And Abraham Lincoln is a great example of this. And so I suppose just as a way of framing this conversation as we move forward through time, I think it is important to ask these questions: is could the good be done with some of the powers that are being exercised today, even if it makes us uncomfortable to consider it?
Okay, say that again.
My question would be,
trying to catch up on the chat.
No problem. What the point that I'm making is that power can be used for good, even if it technically breaks rules in times of emergency.
Yeah,
and so
you don't have civil rights without enforcement, right?
Exactly. And so that's the only point I was making, is like, when as the conversation continues and we're discussing these things, I just want to break the paradigm of like more power is intrinsically bad.
Yeah. So the question on this thing is not like of this entire stream is not like whether or not the is it good or bad that this is happening. It's just,
is it
whether
happening?
Yeah.
What is new?
Well,
what is different?
Yeah.
Yes.
And I constantly preach this as another Nietzschean thing. It's like we really need to move beyond good and evil. And when we're speaking about power, it's less about like what's good, what's bad, and it's just what is. But like, when it came to the Posse Comitatus Act, it was a retraction, and that's why we saw during the civil rights movement, when you did see states trying to like block, you had like Wallace
Schoolhouse door.
Yeah, Wallace at the schoolhouse door, and the Little Rock 9.
Yes.
8.
7. A number. I remember.
The Little Rock
Bridges was one of them, right? Yeah. Anyway.
And that Ike sent in the
National
airborne,
Guard. Oh yeah.
and you know the so and he did so by calling it an insurrection. So that was actually kind of another big leap. I mean, we've seen plenty of times when the Insurrection Act was used for non-insurrections,
Mm-hmm.
but smuggling is not an insurrection,
No.
which was its first use. But you could argue that it is a state's right to regulate its own education, right?
Yeah.
That is, the federal government has no ability to dictate what education looks like in the states.
Or elections, generally speaking. Elections are run by the states. Yeah, there's certain things.
I don't think we've ever had an insurrection called because of an election.
No.
But it has been because of education, because of segregation, and in terms of Little Rock, the governor's response, Faubus or something like that, real southern name right there, but he just closed down the high schools for 2 years or something like that. They literally, before the age of Zoom, were having Zoom meetings over television to keep the schools segregated. So that I couldn't do anything about that, right? But we're seeing plenty of that changing. But I also want to talk about how many times the president has basically willingly gave up power.
Mm-hmm.
So first example is Democratic Republicans, which
Washington in his second term, leaving after 2 terms, I think is the American Cincinnatus is the quintessential example. But yes, after the Washington era, the Democratic Republicans.
Yeah,
sorry to interrupt you. Yeah.
I know, it's just that so Jefferson especially had this whole idea of reducing the interference of the federal government, even though arguably he did more to expand it, with the Louisiana Purchase, for instance.
Mm-hmm.
And the sending out of expeditions and everything. But he was very quick to end any enforcement of the alien and sedition laws,
Yes.
especially the sedition laws, and basically would not refused governing authority that was actually given to him by Congress.
Mm-hmm.
And the later ones, the later Democratic Republicans would continue that all the way until Jackson. Jackson technically was a Democratic Republican when he was elected in 1828, but so was every other candidate.
Right. And Jefferson is a great case study in this dynamic, because it's difficult to say. He used the powers of the presidency to enact Jeffersonian democracy, the idea that, for example, internal taxes are in fact tyranny, abolishing whiskey taxes, using custom duties instead, reducing the size of the standing army, reducing I think diplomatic posts in Europe as being superfluous, I think is another thing that he did. And it was all in the name, it was all wielding his power to enact something that would be reductionist in total power for the federal government and the executive branch. And I think that one counterexample to this, which I think gets to the heart of it, is that, as you mentioned, the Louisiana Purchase was done prior to he was freelancing. Jefferson was in taking that deal, and he justified it by looking at the greater project And in his mind, of course, the yeoman farmers, the expanse of land for the individual men to subsist, that was the true dream of the American project. And so therefore he was willing to bend rules and use his power to try to achieve that greater beacon on the horizon. And I think for this reason, Jefferson also plays into this dynamic of, when do you use your power to do things that you think constitute the good? And as you mentioned, Jefferson explicitly used his power in order to reduce power. There's an irony there that brings us through the Madison and Monroe administrations as well.
Yeah, especially when it comes to, like, he extremely expanded the diplomatic powers of the presidency.
Yes.
But at the same time, really tried not to interfere with the states whatsoever. So there is some deep irony in that, and you'll find that with most of the time, especially anyone who like claims to be trying to reduce the size of government and all that kind of stuff. It's like, basically no one has done that. Ever.
And I know we don't want to preempt the present, but again, like some of the things going on right now, the Department of Education being scaled back is a conservative desire, and yet it's being done in a way that is the opposite of conservative. It's basically the president freelancing as a legislator to enact law and to change the will of the Congress. And so there's these ironies all over the place that need to be addressed.
Yes. But like, there were other times where presidents willingly gave up power. So we talked a bit about the progressives and how they were really trying to make the presidency be like the will of the people and everything. But then for a good decade there, Republicans just were like, nah, I'm just governing.
Harding, Coolidge, Hoover.
I
think Coolidge even
let everything work how it is. I'm just going to make sure that the government works correctly.
Right. And that is why Coolidge in particular, I know, is like a cottage hero for a lot of libertarian-esque Republicans. The negative presidency, probably the closest to the intent of the founders.
I hate to interrupt you real quick. Are you perhaps your mic might be wiggling or something? It sounds like there's like a squeak.
Oh, I'm sorry. Does it sound better now, or do I need to reset?
I'm not hearing it now.
Okay, perhaps I was just fumbling. I also have a dog barking and a kitty cat meowing, so who knows? Maybe it's all involved.
It might be the dog barking. It's hard to tell.
Yeah, I'll try to. I mean, they'll shut him up eventually. I apologize to everyone. I live in a busy neighborhood, and I have neighbors with a little puppy dog who he's anxious. I've noticed. Anyway,
that can make it sound like a squeak.
If it comes back, let me know. I'll mute myself for a little bit and not obtrude.
It wasn't bad. I just saw that it was like your mic stand or something. Anyways,
you're right. President Harding basically is the inverse of Wilson. So the wartime surveillance is gone. The internationalism could not be less interesting to Harding. Domestic sort of riff-raffy stuff going on with the Committee of Public Information. All this is curtailed in the Harding administration. And I did mention internationalism already, but Harding was a longtime opponent of the League of Nations. So the idea that the American presidency might have something to say about international relations is also there's the retreat into isolationism again after World War I. And this is then followed by Coolidge, who's probably the quintessential example of a president who is just there to be the presider president. In the name president, of course, that etymology gives a lot of indication of what was intended for the office. And then Hoover, who I think gets a little bit more heck than he should, because he, during the early parts of the Great Depression, was acting within the paradigm understood at the time about most of what the federal government could do when it comes to intervention in the economy. But again, he was the inverse. Had Teddy Roosevelt or Woodrow Wilson been president at the start of the Great Depression, they would have taken up that bully pulpit to advocate for things, as opposed to Hoover, who more worked with Congress to see what could be done, but it wasn't as pronounced as you would expect. So you see that retraction of power and that that non-desire to wield the presidency in the way that the progressives had envisioned.
And I mean, like with Teddy Roosevelt, there was the Depression of 1907 that he basically didn't react to whatsoever.
Mhm.
It was normal for presidents not to do anything about it. There was the Depression in 1920 where Republicans passed a tariff, and that actually worked because the tariff was explicitly to fund, poor relief. But it wasn't really enforced until Wilson left office, and so the Depression continued all the way until 1921. But then it worked, and so when a lot of people talk about the what's it called, the Hawley tariff, or the whatever, Smoot-Hawley, yeah, Smoot from Utah. Deal with him a lot in terms of his confirmation hearings, but like everybody talks about how bad that was for the economy, right? And it absolutely was. It also helped spread the Depression worldwide, but it was normal at the time. Like, that was the default response to a depression, was to raise a tariff, and use that money to go to poor relief. We had income tax at that point, but it was very low for most Americans, so it was very high for rich Americans. I think it was like 75% for the marginal income tax rate.
It's definitely an interregnum period where the economic, the social contract is shifting. We had the Gilded Age where the economic disparities become untenable, and the progressive era was a great response to that. The relationship between the relationship between people and government from the progressive era to the election of FDR is also in flux. And so what I think you're describing is that tension in the interregnum period where the board is shifting underneath the people in power's feet, and how they all react to it and recognize it says a great deal about how they're seen retrospectively by people who analyze the period.
Yeah. And if with Hoover, while he was trying some poor relief programs and everything, and he did sign the tariff, he actually was against it, but due to the pressure within his own party. But what really showed how little he cared about dealing with the economy was the bonus army, and calling it an insurrection, and ordering out the military to fight the military, to fight veterans, which basically lost him the election. And that was kind of clear tyranny. So even for the presidents who were during this interregnum period, there were like spikes of using that power. So your whole thing of does the power ever really retract, or does it just recede into the background? Kind of shows with the bonus army.
And with not to jump around in time too much, but again, those post-Reconstruction presidents, you had Garfield, Arthur, Cleveland, Harrison, McKinley, and in that period in the Gilded Age, you also had examples of the president, pulling in.
I named them all. Wow, I studied the period. I couldn't do that.
No, I've got it written down. I'm not that great. No. I took notes. I tried to prepare. Actually, no, it all came off the tip of my tongue. If you sat me down, I probably could do it, but there would be a gap or something. Anyway, there are examples where there are presidents being, using the military, to end strikes and things. And so that power, there are blips in the ebb and the flow. There's also just the reality that another great example, he's always there as a great example, is Abraham Lincoln, right? He was elected, and if the South had not walked away, he would have let the institution of slavery continue.
Mhm.
So his use of executive power was his second option, not his first instinct. He could have been an administrative president in the vein of Franklin Pierce or Buchanan, but he wasn't because of the circumstances and the exigencies of crisis. And I think you're describing there as well, like we definitely can we can condemn his use of the power, but it's there. To your point, it never goes away. And even the presidents we don't see as exercising the power to the greatest extent possible, we can find counterexamples, and part of that's because the job was expanding in this period as well. There are more times where you have to make more decisions on more things, and the idea that you're always going to behave in a certain way is unrealistic.
Yeah. So that will play into the question of, like, can power even actually retract? But now we can finally get to the present, because now we've talked about how power expands and retracts, and like what constitutes tyranny, executive overreach, and that. But now we have a president that's really challenging all of this altogether. So what is the difference between Trump 1 and 2?
I haven't noticed any, sorry. So in my video that was kind of the pretext for this conversation, I identified a couple differences, and I tried to distinguish Trump 1 and Trump 2 using the framework in a book called Presidential Leadership in Political Time. And in that book, there are archetypes of presidential leadership given. And one of them is the preemption president. And I don't know if this is exactly how the author intended it to be used, but the preemptive president is someone who comes in to the White House and challenges the status quo. They challenge the way things are done. They ruffle feathers. So we've talked about Wilson. We've talked about Nixon. Those are good examples of people who started to shift the relationship between the president and the other branches of government, and also the relationship between what people expect from the president and its government. In Trump's first term, I think he falls into this archetype of coming in and challenging the status quo, but often being thwarted by those around him, including in his own administration. And the reason I brought it up is because I believe in his second term, President Trump is acting much more as a different archetype. He is acting as a reconstructive president, nothing to do with Reconstruction after the Civil War, more to do with the way in which power is wielded and the paradigm shift that goes on there. President Trump has been reelected, and the plan was explicitly to take the brakes off, to make sure that his will is what happens within his branch of government. It's often been described in the context of unitary executive theory that the president's branch is the president's to control. So the second administration of President Trump is, to use the phrasing of Presidential Leadership in Political Time, a presidency which takes us from order shattering to order affirming. In his first term, President Trump was trying to push these boundaries. In his second term, he's doing it successfully. And I know we could go through many examples of those, but just one example
below.
to just give one example of what that looks like, we could talk about impoundment. So there is a fundamental order shattering and what is now becoming order affirming action by the president to not spend money that Congress has sent him and to abolish agencies, the most famous one being USAID. Now, impoundment's not a completely new thing. We could talk a little bit about how it's been done on the margins prior to Richard Nixon. During Nixon, he did it quite a bit to the tune of billions and ended up getting an act, the Impoundment Act of 1974, to try to stop him. But President Trump has successfully impounded funds and ended an agency. And so in my video, the thing that I identify, all this is
congressionally authorized
agency. So all of that preface to say that the number one difference, the number one new thing that I identified in my video is a form of executive legislating. That's a loose term. It's just one I made up. So I'm sure that, more legitimate people will come along and refine it. But well, I don't know if I'm the first to ever think of it, just to be clear. I'm not trying to claim pure originality. Just to say that's what I called it in the videos, quasi-legislation.
By decree in this.
Yeah.
Which, that has a long history to it.
Mm-hmm.
And but yeah, it is it is essentially executive legislating.
And it is essentially a new power. I think it's the prerogative of any future president to give it a swing. They might get shot down, and we'll talk a little bit about how these power dynamics might shift. But in the interim period, whether the next president is J.D. Vance pursuing a national conservative agenda that would feel familiar to the MAGA years of second Trump term, or whether it is a AOC presidency and she's using this quasi legislative power to stop CIA operations, as we were discussing earlier, to abolish ICE, which, by the way, in total had a budget that looks a lot very familiar to USAID. So why not? To abolish strange programs in the Pentagon. Why wouldn't a future president, regardless of regardless of ideological persuasion, not pursue this new power, whether or not they agree with President Trump or not? I think it's the number one innovation of this presidency.
I remember during the Obama years, there was a Congress passed a bill to like fund the building of a certain number of new tanks, and even the U.S. Army was just like, "What? We don't want this.
No, thank you."
like we've got a bunch of tanks just sitting in the desert. Why'd you do this? But like, Obama just kind of like, Congress said so.
Yeah. And he would be well within his rights, in my opinion, to invoke the Impoundment Act. The Impoundment and Control Act did give a procedure for impounding funds. And funny enough, the very first example that I've ever found in history of impoundment of funds comes from Jefferson impounding warships rather than tanks. But the same principle applied is like, hey, we don't need this right now. Like, I think that the reason this law passed is like past its justification, and maybe we could reconsider. It's not
warships have water tanks,
right? I mean, faithfully execute the laws in Section 3 of Article 2, right? So if spending the money would not be a faithful execution of the law as intended, then I think it's a natural back and forth that we can have. But the legislative power that now exists, I believe, partially in the White House, is here to stay for as long as there is as long as there's American gridlock. One of my professors in school wrote a book called American Gridlock. His name was James Thurber. I think he might have just retired. And it was a compendium book with other political scientists, but the idea of the book was to show all the different ways in which our government is becoming paralyzed. And there is a reasonable way to express that the actions, for example, under the Obama administration on DACA, under the Biden administration on student loans, and now under the Trump administration, a lot of these exercises of an executive power are a response to the fact that nothing is getting done substantially in Congress.
DACA is another really interesting one where it's just kind of like that is basically executive legislating. Like it was supposed to be dealing with legislation, but the legislation never passed.
Yes.
And so he just went forward with it anyways.
He did. And actually, I put I don't want to bulldoze the conversation, but I do want to say I put a disclaimer in my video about that, because I do believe that was an attempt at presidential legislating, and the difference being that it failed and that there was lots of complications through the court cases. And I think, funny enough, it is still...
The Dreamer expansion was failed, but like, DACA, but like Dreamers are given like broad immunity from. Yes,
it got really complicated with the court system. The court decided to allow some of it because it like had already happened. It was almost like a humanitarian thing rather than an endorsement of executive power. And it's still something that kind of winds its way and gets complicated in the courts. The only point I was making
is
that
age limit for like when you came in, like you had to be under like 12 or something like that. And
right.
Just on human rights grounds, deporting somebody because they came in when they were 11, it's just inhumane. And so that makes sense, but it is essentially a power, an executive power of executive legislation.
And it's like the war power. The war power kind of shifted in the 20th century and became a little more explicit after the War Powers Act. And now we're in a similar situation with budgeting. The president now has a much more explicit role in deciding how funds are spent, if and until the Congress decides to take that back. But for as long as the Congress is not exercising its power, that power to at least give it a swing exists in the White House.
Yeah, and there's the thing on this, like the Congress. A lot of the things that he's violated, for instance, like when he fired all the investigator generals or
Inspector,
isn't it inspectors general?
Inspectors general, like attorneys general. Yeah.
Yeah, like the. I hate how that works.
Me too.
That's stupid French stuff. Everything that's wrong with English is the French's fault.
Das ist richtig. That is true. That is right. Yeah. It is not the Germans' fault. Das haben wir nicht gemacht. We didn't do that. Okay.
Yeah, but
anyway.
the Germans put like extra verbs at the end of their freaking sentences,
Yes, they
which
do.
turns it into just utter gibberish when you transliterate.
Yes, it does. It takes your brain, when you're learning German, it takes your brain quite a long time to learn to wait for that second verb or third verb or fourth verb. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they just like put them all together at the end. So it's just like, if it's a really long compound sentence, it's just like this blob of blurbs at the end. And like
when I was first learning, I literally visualized holding my second verb in my hand and throwing it to the end of a sentence. And that's how I actually helped myself learn it. It's the physical imagining.
You actually speak it well. I can barely read it.
Yeah. I'm very lucky to ein bisschen, das ist gut.
Sehr ein bisschen.
Yeah. I love the German language, but yes, it is quirky in that way.
And all languages are, but like that's one thing I'm thankful that we didn't inherit.
Yeah. We do have the vocabulary. We do have some of the confusing ways that verbs are declined. Like the reason people get confused about who and whom, you can thank the Germans for that. And to me and mine and all that stuff. But the presidency of the United States, I think, was the subject of our live stream.
Germans to serve as a good distraction. But
second
firing
power,
of the
perhaps, of Trump?
inspectors general.
Oh, yes,
that's
go
right.
ahead.
So the firing of the inspectors general was explicitly illegal, right? Had to give Congress 30 days notice before they could be fired,
and for malfeasance specifically in law.
Yeah, and they had to have like some specific grievance. Like he did neither of those things, which means it is completely illegal.
Yes,
I did it anyways.
In theory,
and Congress did nothing about it. And so really, like there's that old proverb, if a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, does it truly make a sound? If Trump breaks the law and Congress doesn't enforce it, did
Trump breaks the law and Congress covers their ear, did the law exist? And I think the functional answer is no.
Yeah,
it didn't. It becomes quasi-legal. And if the president defies the courts, as I think one of my friends pointed out an article to me that there was, and I have to verify this, I've not done it independently, but basically 1 out of every 3 court decisions so far in this administration have been ignored or, worked around. Yeah. And so like, that's another way in which the balance of power is altering, that the executive is again, the balloon is inflating and the other branches of government aren't intervening to shrink it. And so therefore it's effectively just how our government functions for a while. And I know that we will eventually talk about how that situation might alter, but for the meantime, we can say that tacitly the president has abolished an agency, fired people. He's, let's say suspended habeas corpus to do extraterritorial deportations. He has fired people from BLS, from Economic Council, from the Department of Education, from election commissioners.
It's basically suspended due process for immigration. He's
federalized the National Guard in ways that's probably illegal. I think courts have found it to be illegal. He did it anyway. Withholding emergency fund, or at least threatening to do it for states that don't comply with his immigration policies. The list can go on and on.
Yeah, the first thing he did was one of the first things he did was expand the pardon power to just pardoning people who had attacked Congress, and like Congress, of course, did nothing about it.
Yeah,
Like,
and in a way that Trump became an order-affirming president before he even took office is displayed in the way that President Biden abused the pardon power in his last months. I mean, you can argue it was out of fear of retribution, and that's coming to fruition through the use of another way that a power is being unitary executive theoried to death right now. So the politicization of the Justice Department.
Yeah, partisan DOJ. Yeah,
partisan DOJ. Yeah,
and that's just how I have it listed below. And the partisanization. I don't know what the.
That sounds like a word. Yeah,
I said it. Therefore, it's a word.
It's a word.
The partisanization of the DOJ has been it comes back to that thing of like, does power ever really retract? Because like there was a time when the DOJ was absolutely partisan. Teddy used that to great effect. Like and like the whole push for finally enforcing the Sherman Antitrust Act, when it had basically languished for a decade at that point, and the only time it had been used prior to that was to break up a union. And like then Teddy's like, no, I got a big stick and I'm going to use it.
Yeah. And the only question for future wielders of executive power, at least for the foreseeable future, is how will they use the Justice Department to their ends? Because there's no one, I don't think anyone on the left is like, oh, I'd love to go back to the days of Merrick Garland as Attorney General. They're like, I want our own version of Pam Bondi to be fighting for X, Y, and Z, right? And that, I mean, we can obviously discuss whether that's good or bad, but it is, to use your phrasing earlier. The same thing with all of the use of emergency powers. So one of the things that I go on and on about in my videos, sometimes literally just copy pasting myself a little bit, is the crime emergency, the immigration emergency, the trade emergency for tariffs, and the one that I think is the funniest, the International Criminal Court emergency that was declared to stop the arrest of Benjamin Netanyahu. But you can't see it. My kitty cat is right here messing with the chair. So if you hear anything, but yeah, these are, these are things that will take place in reverse very soon, or will be expanded upon if JD Vance is the next president after Donald Trump.
Ooh, she's getting in a dangerous position there. She's almost knocking down the water thing.
I see her. I trust her. We will find out.
You might get bumped in the back of the head.
I feel like if I alarm her, she's more likely to actually knock it over as opposed to.
There she goes. But what's her name, by the way?
Sophie.
Sophie, right?
It's just a name I like. It's a human name, but I always love her wisdom, Sophia. So
I mean, my cat has a very human name.
Yeah,
literally named
very
after
much.
a human. That human's been dead for 1,000 years, but
he's reborn.
Yeah. Just his crusade is against the freaking moths that get in. Those damn Saracen moths.
She's a great hunter too. I did want to bring up just briefly, because we've already discussed it quite a bit, but the other thing I identified in my video was just that full culmination of the Wilsonian dream. So I think the first difference in this administration is more legal, as in there's new power through impoundment, through quasi-legislating. The second is more emotional. The president, the progressive view of the big as man as he can be president has come to full term. And it can ebb and flow, but because of the way that our primary system's set up, because of the precedents being set, I think we should just expect this is how things will be, that we should expect larger than life personalities to embody the White House. Yeah. And to claim to be exercising the unfiltered democratic will of the people, for better or worse.
Yeah, populism is here to stay, at least for the time being.
Right.
Like if the Democrats manage to actually get the presidency back, it will be through populism.
Yes.
you're not going to have these like milquetoast Democrats like, you know, Clinton, frickin' Obama and Biden. You know, these kind of like neolibs, but are just kind of like cool guys. You know.
Yeah, I do think Obama had a more of a larger than life personality that lent itself. I do think that, you know, the fact that he won over Hillary Clinton in 2016 was part of this development of the popular presidency. And I don't think that his appeal should be discounted in that way. But your overall point certainly stands with me that the fundamental shift, fundamental shift. Can you tell dinner time is getting somewhat close, even though it's still 4 hours away?
Drive by meow.
Yeah. The fundamental point stands that populism is here to stay in the presidency. And later on, when we talk, I hope we'll discuss a little bit about how the rebalancing might occur, or how power might retract again. But for the meantime, that's not going on. That's not happening for at least another few presidencies until there's a fundamental shift. And particularly if the economy does, what's crazy about all this is that we have experienced this in a time of relative prosperity. And that this has come to full term at a time when economic inequality is out of control. We can talk about some of the more fundamental dynamics of all this. I don't want to discount suffering out there and be like, oh, the Dow's up, therefore it's crazy that we have populism. That's not what I'm saying. Just more like, it's not like people aren't in like destitution is not the status quo for most people. Most people are riding that line, trying their best to maintain something like lower middle class lifestyle. That's becoming more difficult. So again, I'm not trying to be insensitive, just to say that we are living in times of economic growth, and yet this is still occurring. And I just think that for as long as this continues, as long as there's gridlock, and if you add to that something like an economic depression, it could get very fascinating from a theoretical perspective for people who aren't actually living through it like we are.
Yeah. And, you know, the problem with populism is that it doesn't, and I should shift to the next section on this. And actually, I'm going to add one more thing to it, which is populism. But like, you know, there is this like new theory of rulership in terms of the presidency.
Yes.
And you know, populism is the most obvious one, right? It's the
public opinion filtered through a person.
Yeah. And that's
or the
kind
majoritarian opinion filtered through a person.
It's not majority.
Okay, you know, let's go back. Let me retract that. Speaking of retracting things, let me retract that. Perceived popular will through a person.
But also, populism is less defined by, you know, popular opinion and everything, and it's more about attacking an establishment, right?
Yeah, it's about grievance, or it's about defining yourself against.
Yeah,
with simple solutions often.
Yeah, so it can be demagoguery, like what we're seeing with this current president, but it can absolutely be affirmative or you know, progressive. Certainly. Socially progressive.
Gilded Age populism was grounded in real suffering.
And, you know, there is this real suffering that is driving MAGA, is driving, you know, the progressive arm of the Democrats like AOC, Bernie, and all that. And there's that deep-seated despair that the U.S. has been feeling. For instance, something that goes into my own work is that there's been a rise in suicides throughout the United States, and it's been pretty pronounced. And the you know, and my job was in linking that to the rise of mass shootings. And
like in Vegas. I know that was a big part of your
it was the conclusion of my dissertation, right? But there's which
anyone who's watching this who hasn't seen your video, with your. Didn't you do a video about like kind of going through your
I
dissertation?
literally just read it.
Yeah, I watched that.
I just read so my dissertation's really about like the violence in the Southwest during the frontier period, but like it's the whole point of it was prompted by the Las Vegas shooting, and so I have an not an introduction, what's that called, a prologue and an epilogue. And that's what I read for that video, where it was, why are mass shootings happening? And I literally just read the prologue and epilogue to my dissertation. And funny enough, I actually had to shelve that because another mass shooting happened at my alma mater, UNLV, literally the day after my mom was teaching in that very building. So
that's awful. And
he was targeting professors. So, yeah. But she was teaching like Tuesday, Thursday, and he came in on a Wednesday.
That's awful.
Yeah, so that's why I put it on hold for a while. But yeah, that's just reading my dissertation, and surprisingly did pretty well and is monetized, and all that money is going to a charity, by the way.
This is your call to go watch that video.
But the real conclusion is that, like, on the mass shootings thing is like, why are these mass shootings happening? And everybody who studies the phenomenon kind of agrees that mass shootings are basically an angry form of suicide, right? That's actually kind of a direct quote of the Violence Project, and so the question comes down to, why are we seeing a rise in suicides? And the real answer is economic despair, essentially, and that's brought on by neoliberalism. When it comes down to what is some change that's happening that's on a societal level, that's causing the violence. Violence is always a symbol of change, and it's the failure of neoliberalism. It always comes down to the status quo, or what's changing in the status quo.
And you would include the technological shifts, like the loneliness driven by algorithms and isolation, as part of that neoliberal dynamic?
Maybe.
Okay.
The point on that is, it's an epilogue. It's not actually my topic.
Sure.
But this is what I got to.
I gotcha. So the question of despair linking to the idea of populism, which I think is where we started.
Mm-hmm. So like that despair from neoliberalism, we've been seeing ever since neoliberalism really took hold in the late 70s. And consummate neolib is obviously Reagan, but Carter was too.
When you look at civil service reform, not like not like the stuff from the late 19th century, but like restructuring the federal bureaucracy, Jimmy Carter was one that took efforts to try to. He was like the OG Doge kind of stuff was going on under Jimmy Carter, not Ronald Reagan. If you ever look it up, it's been I haven't investigated that since grad school, so somebody fact check me in the comments if I'm wrong.
I mean, this wouldn't exist if it weren't for and by the way, this is what I've been drinking, is a barrel-aged imperial stout. Got out the good stuff for this one.
Did I say Rasputin?
Yeah, Old Rasputin. It's North Coast. Old Rasputin is actually the
Russian man who lived so long ago. He was wrong.
But this particular one, not the barrel-aged version, but I think I have the non-barrel-aged version in here. Yep. The non-barrel-aged version is what popularized Russian imperial stouts in the U.S. So there's some history for you.
Yeah, there we go.
And the reason why microbrews exist is because Carter neoliberalized it. He deregulated home brewing, which allowed for the existence of microbrews. So if you like craft, you have neoliberalism to thank for that.
I never thought we'd go this way when we logged on.
It's one of my fun, like, I obviously
Checkmate
do not like
was-
neoliberalism, but I do really like craft brews.
Microbrews. So what will I do? I guess I have to vote for Reagan if he ever comes back from the grave.
You have to
Well,
vote for Carter. Carter's the one.
Carter.
But like that was a neoliberal reform. So far be it for me to say that it's all been it's caused nothing but despair, but like it has caused despair, and that's what populism is reacting to. But their answer is that there's some establishment, and instead of it being that it's just the way policy has been going for the last 40 years, 45, for 48.
You're saying that it's a response to something real.
Yeah, instead of it being a response to something real, it's like populism is a response to something real, but it is to cast that response away from the actual issue. So, for Trump, it's immigrants, it's wokeness or whatever. For you're getting kind of close when you have like the anti-oligarchy thing going on right now. I think it's just AOC and Bernie doing that, right? There's,
as far as I'm aware, yeah, that's the ones I've seen. I've used footage of them at their rallies in my videos before, and yeah.
I thought that we're like expanding in terms of like who was going to those, but I don't know. I don't pay attention.
They're very potentially true. I'm not tuned in.
Yeah, but like, if you kind of squint at it sideways, you can kind of see like, oh well, that's kind of trying to redefine neoliberalism as just like the rich people, but like no, it's the entire legislature. The establishment is everyone, and so the populism is ultimately a distraction, and it's pretty effective though. But it's also just one part, because Trump was absolutely a populist in his first term. There's something different now.
It's that people have that a new coalition is formed in the Republican Party, made up of libertarian tech bros. This is not me. This is just the conventional wisdom. Libertarian tech bros, national conservatives, people who go further right of national conservatives, outright fascists and quasi-fascists, and blood and soil types. And
I should answer this one. So this is talking about the fact that there's been a bunch of mobilization to the border, and there has been a lot of people like speculating, is that an invasion? It's like, actually, the military force at the border isn't anywhere close to as big as it got in 2020. So no. The answer is no. But like,
if operations were to be done inside the Mexican border,
there are already operations happening inside of Mexico. That's another thing. But that's also not something new. We've had plenty of times where we've, and this is not something new in terms of like, oh, Trump did it in his first term, but like, no, every president has basically done this since Reagan, as part of the war on drugs, has been to basically either send in CIA, FDA, not FDA, wait, federal drug and no,
DEA.
DEA, there we go. DEA and FBI to and their enforcement wings, which has often been quite bloody. Literal, major firefights with dozens of casualties have been happening since the 80s. There was already basically a war on drugs, by that time anyways. But the point is, no, it's not an invasion.
So you were talking about populism a second ago, and I did want to ask, so populism is perceived will through one person, and that, I assume you set that up to contrast with the Führerprinzip, the leader principle, and the state of exception as the reverse of that, where the leader's will is to be the will of the people because the leader wants it that way. Is that what you were trying to set up with that?
So, Führerprinzip is the idea that one populist figure is the embodiment of the people. Basically, that kind of Hobbesian,
Leviathan?
that Leviathan principle, but written into a more modern concept that a leader is the principle of the people.
Mm-hmm. And that policy that comes from him, even if it seems as though it is contrary to the will of the people, because it comes from that Führer, it must be the will of the people, and therefore it's
Führer just means leader.
Yeah, and of course we're explicitly talking about the German one from that era that would get us demonetized. Yeah. I would draw a little more distinction in that, like, at a certain point, it's now will of the people is now a misnomer of just what the leader wants. But it
kind of always has been.
Right. And that's and it's just I guess when we're talking about presidential leadership, I hesitate to draw these comparisons because I know it makes people just ignore you. But I will say that I wouldn't call it the Führerprinzip, but let's just say that there has been grand efforts in the second Trump administration to follow behind Trump's back and forth with himself often on places like Truth.
You're bunking the camera, by the way.
Oh, I apologize. That was my cat.
Okay.
She's my eternal scapegoat. There's the people running behind President Trump to basically give an intellectual framework to whatever he decides randomly on a Tuesday on Truth Social, is a form of retrofitting what the president says and just saying, okay, this is the will of the people. It must be because he said it. Yeah. And he's going to be unfiltered in a second term. And so as a theory of leadership, that basically whatever the leader says goes, even if our instincts tell us that tariffs are bad economic policy in the long term, even if our instincts tell us that this is not the natural inclination of more libertarian policies, like, I don't know, like the H-1B thing that was a controversy towards the beginning of the administration, that we're going to do it anyway because this one guy has said it. And that will basically continue until it becomes clear that there is a price to be paid for going down that path.
Mm-hmm. I saw a video from I think his name is I think it's Jacob Geller, but he did a thing called like Dreaming of Nuremberg.
No thanks. That's not
kind of explicitly saying like, we need a Nuremberg for MAGA kind of thing. But then like the whole video was like, look, Nuremberg wasn't as definitive as you think it is. And like,
it was not.
And
it was, I'm glad it happened, but it was not as definitive as.
Yeah. So there's like this idea of Nuremberg, and then there's like the reality of it and the subsequent trials and all the subsequent pardons. Like the whole thing, for instance, with the I was just following orders thing in later trials actually pans out. Like it becomes legally precedented that is a good excuse for genocide. And like, so, every time somebody like invokes that as like, we proved it wrong at Nuremberg. No, we didn't.
We also didn't give the binding international Leviathan, to use that word, that would come to be the United Nations, the power to actually enforce any of these things. And that's, people, that sounds bad, but then you also realize that like an enforceable world government is also kind of scary and might lead to bad things. And you see a moral gray area there.
Not to get all Bircher, but like, if the UN were to try to say like, Trump is a fascist and therefore, we need to impose sanctions because of the violation of human rights and everything, or something along those lines. I'd start being like, we need to pull out of the UN.
Yeah. Exactly. And that's the true challenge of an international institution like that, for better or worse.
Yeah.
To go back to the theories of rulership, I do see unitary executive steering theory scrolling past. And I do think that that's the most pertinent one, at least for that, and cult of personality, I guess, are the most pertinent ones to discuss when we're discussing the future, because I do think that a grand extent of our politics going forward will be based in being a big personality to win primaries, being larger than life, and then once in office, delivering in a way that is the full expression of your branch of government, as big as it can go at the time. And I guess I'll just go ahead and say it. I think that the balancing, if there is to be one in the future, will not come by the presidency itself taking a step back, but through the will of either other branch of government, basically making themselves more powerful to combat the growth empowerment in the executive branch. So it's not that future presidents will retract power, but if anything will happen, it will be that the future branches of government will actually act as a check.
But we're not really talking about the future here. This section's theories of rulership is really talking about like how to visualize what Trump is doing right now. Right. And with the unitary executive theory, part of the reason why that's there is that, like, you mentioned it in your video, but like also there's this larger question of what that theory actually says, because the way it's being used now is essentially that like the president is the king of the executive branch and may do whatever he wants with it. But that's not really what unitary executive theory was.
No, there's a more conservative small c interpretation of the theory, which is just that the president has a lot of influence in his branch, and that if it doesn't answer to him in some way, shape, or form, then is he really vested with executive power? And that's a legitimate question to ask. We talked about some of the freelancing of the CIA, or maybe we could talk about the FBI spying on political opponents. We could talk about some of the ways in which what would be pejoratively called the deep state have worked to thwart the executive in illegitimate ways. And we could discuss on the merits of the argument whether or not the president should have more power vested. It should be more unitary or less unitary. But the way that it's being applied in the Trump administration, unitary executive theory is a maximalist position. That is to say that if the president thinks it must be.
Yeah.
And that is obviously
that's where
bad.
I'd say it's getting towards the fear principle. Like the way they're using it is awfully similar to the fear principle. And like the unitary executive theory wasn't that originally.
No.
And somebody pointed out in the comments, it's a human being.
The unitary executive. Oh, you go ahead.
And so in the movie Vice, they harp on unitary executive theory a lot, and I like point out that's not what you basically. He's using like the fake version that Vice was harping on falsely.
Right.
The movie Vice, the one that was about Bush's vice president. Wow, I'm forgetting.
Oh, that movie, Dick Cheney.
Dick Cheney, yeah. The movie about Dick Cheney. That movie sucks. And like truly just a bunch of conspiracist nonsense. But like it seems like he's taking that warped view of unitary executive theory and just applying it as if it was true.
You could imagine a unitary executive theory where, let's imagine it's like the New Deal again. Or let's go out of the New Deal. Let's talk about LBJ's Great Society. And Congress passes a law that says we're going to create this new program to combat poverty because we have a war on poverty, and the president and the Congress are in concert with one another to make this new poverty eradication program happen. And that there is something going on in the executive branch that is making that go slowly. Let's say there is a regulatory body that's not moving quick enough, right? You could have a unitary executive theory version that says it is the president's prerogative to get in there and bang some heads together and faithfully execute the law. That is his constitutional obligation. Meanwhile, what we're actually getting is not that the president is saying, I'm going to forcefully and faithfully execute the laws, but instead, I am the law. I am your retribution. And that's the distinction that I think you're drawing there.
So where's the how does that apply to like imperial presidency?
So the imperial presidency.
Well, that was a loud one.
Right here. I'm sorry, everybody. She's
great. She's great.
She has actually strong opinions about Schlesinger's 1973 work and wants to join. His book was mostly about the war powers. In fact, at the beginning of the book, he's like, there's a lot we could talk about, but I just want to focus on war powers. So in that context, we could talk about the fact that unitary executive theory would say, the most maximalist extreme version would say, if the president wants to invade Mexico, he shall. The less extreme version of unitary executive theory would say the president will follow the War Powers Act to the letter of the law. And if the Congress tells him to invade Mexico, even if he doesn't particularly want to, it is his job to faithfully execute the law. And so he will do it even if there is resistance in the military. So that would be the two versions of unitary executive theory that would apply to the imperial presidency with war powers.
Yeah, and that's why because I mean, I'm seeing more and more historians, because Schlesinger Jr. was a historian, and he was kind of like the last torchbearer of New Dealism, basically, and he also became quite the curmudgeon in his later years.
Love it. I love my American curmudgeons. John Adams was my favorite founder for that reason. He was like, everything sucks and everyone sucks. And I was like,
well, that's
cool.
Very much a New England Unitarian kind of position.
Yeah.
But like the Schlesinger became kind of like he basically became like anti-woke in the end. So he actually started renouncing the idea of the imperial presidency, and then also getting really annoyed when people started using it to describe Buchanan and his whole push for culture war, and like.
And it is a bastardization of the term. It was a specific term for a specific dichotomy, and it basically became a catch-all for like in presidential power being expanding.
And that's why it's like I kind of hesitate to use it, because it's more about like international power. The power of the president to just kind of go and start Vietnam.
And on the other hand, it is a useful term in its misapplied way. So like the way that it's been understood commonly as just expanding a branch of government to be bigger than it was intended, I think is actually quite useful. You think about like the idea, again, I'm going to use Thucydides, like empires tend to expand, right? When Athens went to explain their empire, according to Thucydides, it was because it's just natural for empires to expand. And yeah, exactly. Herodotus was better than Thucydides. You're right. No, I'm just kidding.
No, take that back. So
what the hell was I talking about?
Ted called the father of lies the freaking better than the preeminent freaking historian.
Empires tend to expand. Power, I think, naturally tends to expand without a check on it. And I think that's for that reason, looking at the imperial presidency as a metaphor, looking at the presidency as a metaphor for like an empire surrounded by two other empires of the other two branches of government, the judiciary and the legislature, is a pretty good metaphor, because right now it's expanding. That empire is getting bigger. And so I think it is actually a useful way to think about it, even if it's not what Schlesinger intended when he wrote it.
Because the other thing with Trump is that he's quite isolationist, Yes,
he is. And that's maybe another distinction between him and Wilson, actually.
Yeah, that's a huge difference.
He is the fruition of Wilson's dream when it comes to the power of the president, but he is basically the destroyer of what became of Wilsonian internationalism that is so baked into the cake right now.
Yeah.
After these 100 years, that people literally can't fathom a world in which America just like, what is our interest? What's good for us? People are like, that's not how foreign policy works. And you're like, that's how foreign policy worked until Wilson came in and basically forced European powers to accept this new values-based internationalism. And so yeah, Trump is the inverse of Wilson in that way.
Yeah. Like the threatening to pull out of NATO and like all that, and then his handling of like just more support for Israel, more support, like less support for frickin' Ukraine, just this and a total like I don't even want to deal with the genocide in frickin' Sudan. There we go. And like
I don't care if there are material consequences to abolishing USAID. Like, even if you critiqued USAID and you said there's lots of like weird black ops and things and like the stuff they were doing in Haiti was bizarre, even if you accept all that as a premise, just cutting off USAID, just being like day one, it's gone. Like you are killing people, right? That's one man deciding to like the fate of millions of lives. It's actually incredible.
Yeah, and it's actually it already is resulting in immense harm.
Right.
But it's less imperial, I guess, is my point here. Is that like
literal,
like he I mean, he did do the whole thing with Iran and just suddenly starting a war.
Yeah, I think you could argue it's strangely enough, as much as he harps on China, it is a little bit more like the way that the Qing wanted to be seen in the world, where they wanted the deference, the benefits,
Qing
the
as
gifts.
in like third century BC.
No, QING. So the dynasty that fell when
Qing,
the Republican government.
Qin. Okay.
When the Republican government came under Chiang Kai-shek and then eventually fell to the communists. So the Qing that fell and ruled from I forget
like
the exact year, but ruled
17th century until 1911.
Exactly. So that Qing emperor wanted, like, the idea there was not to rule the world as a hegemon, but to simply be this place that received deference, that received gifts, that was considered better than everyone else. And I do think Trump has a little bit of that emperor on high vibe, where he wants to influence the world in a way in which every country gives him things. That's why these trade deals, all these trade deals come in and offer gifts. All of these trade deals they like subjugate all these other powers as secondary by the European Union basically being forced to advocate for their own tariffs. It's a very strange dynamic.
Yeah. It's an interesting way of putting it. I mean, and that's very imperial, right? Like the whole,
it's just a different brand of imperial. Yeah.
I guess it could add to all this the mandate of heaven.
Yes. Oh, God. Yeah.
And that speaks to his more Christian nationalist bent as well, which I find endlessly fascinating, because like he is the antithesis of like what Christians
on a personal level, he's the antithesis.
Yeah, he should be everything that they would consider the Antichrist. Like,
yeah, but it's so easy to write it off
in faithful comes clothed as though the faith should come to his bosom, but when they okay, I'm going to stop with the preaching, but it fits the scripture of Antichrist quite well, especially with the way that that evangelicals have embraced him.
Yeah, it's a version of Christian utilitarianism where the good things that happen.
I'm going to add mandate of heaven to the banner.
There you go. The good things that Trump does from a Christian nationalist perspective outweigh his personal vices. And it's as simple as that. And honestly, like, I know we're a little off the beaten trail here, but like during all the discussion about Epstein, I continued to think that like nothing will matter, because even if a video came out of him doing something awful or something that was like unequivocal proof, it wouldn't matter to a lot of people, because they'd say, on the whole, he has done X, Y, and Z to stop abortion, to bring a Christian nationalist government, and his personal life, especially one that is over in the past with a dead man, is not relevant to that. And that's not my personal opinion, but that's just how I've seen the rationalization playing out if the files were ever to come out, right? Like, just to your point.
And yeah, even if it does turn out that he's a pedo, like they're just going to be like, well, that's what the 80s were like. Like,
or just even if they, it's even worse version of what I just said. Yeah, where it's like we don't even care. We don't even like. I was saying like, oh, it's morally abominable, but it's in the past and it's outweighed by the good. But you're right. They'll probably say like, well, that's just how things were back in the day.
That's just locker room talk.
Yeah. I mean, it gets bleak, and that's part of why I really lingered on the question of what comes next quite a bit. And I know you don't want to get to the future yet, but that's part of why I think about what comes next is like, is there
that is literally the next question, but I do want to cover the other two of these that we haven't talked enough about, which is state of exception and cult of personality.
When I heard state of exception, I thought of Bukele in El Salvador, but it was actually the political scientist or the political theorist from Nazi Germany, Schmidt.
Carl Schmitt, yeah. So the whole idea of state of exception is that things have gotten so out of whack that it's necessary to impose a dictatorship, and that basically anything is worth doing because of how bad the previous administration has mucked things up. And we hear this Schmittian, is that a term? Schmittian.
It is now, Mr. Shakespeare.
I said it, therefore it is a word. But like we keep hearing this like excuse for all of this tyranny is that well, under Biden, everything went to Schmidt.
Good catch.
And now we are living in a state of exception, and so we have to implement Project 2025 in order to make America great again.
Yeah, I think the pertinent quote that I admittedly wasn't familiar with, but now I am, is the sovereign decides the exception. That's like the quintessential point. And I tried to think of it in a non-generous way as you're describing it. I also tried to think of it as in a generous way as like, and I realize we're talking about someone who is justifying Nazi stuff. So I don't mean like generous as in like,
literal member
he's
of the
actually
Nazi
right.
Party.
But just the idea itself, would apply in an emergency situation, like as described under Abraham Lincoln, right? Like the habeas corpus thing is an exception decided by the sovereign. So it can show its head in more than one place, but the fundamental question is that exception by this sovereign virtuous? Is it in comportment with the project of the country, the American project, or is it part of the expectation of the social contract established in that society? Yeah. These are the sorts of things you have to contend with that particular leadership style.
And then the thing, because it's the whole idea of a state of exception is largely a justification for all this, rather than like an actual mode of rulership. It basically is just like monarchy, absolute monarchy. Cool.
You can see the end game through El Salvador, which is, President Bukele from El Salvador has been a darling of the new right and has been on shows getting
and he literally declared himself like an anarcho-capitalist or something like that, right?
Maybe at some point, because he's into crypto. But in any event, he's not one of those. He's not an anarcho-capitalist at all. The gang violence that followed his entry into office was met with something called the state of exception. It was literally called that. And Bukele and the Congress invoked this state of exception in order to basically declare martial law. And
I think Helen pointed it out. That's the person I'm thinking of.
From
Bukele
Argentina.
is freaking El Salvador.
El Salvador, right?
Yeah,
Milei,
okay.
Javier Milei is in Argentina. And yes, you're right. He did declare himself an anarcho-capitalist.
Yeah.
And he took the chainsaw to like regulations. But Bukele was elected. He was the mayor of San Salvador first, and promised to end gang violence. And part of that effort was, after a weekend of extreme gang violence, that's no joke, and would, in my opinion, count as an emergency that would require martial law. He and the Congress created this state of exception that allowed for the mass arrest of lots of people, many of which were innocent. But again, we're talking about an emergency situation.
Yeah.
The problem was that state of exception became the status quo.
Yeah.
And
Well,
that's the
idea of Schmidt's state of exception, is that it's not just a state of emergency. Emergency is a temporary thing.
Yes.
A state of and it applies to some specific problem.
Yes.
A state of exception is nationwide and total.
Yes.
And
that's
so
what
for Schmidt, it was like he constantly referenced Madison Grant and the whole dang it, what's Grant's book? The Passing of the Great Race. That's it. He constantly referenced, like, there's too many of the. He really hated French people. I can kind of sympathize with that, but like,
French people.
Just as my camera blurs.
Yeah.
But no, I'm joking, obviously. But he's basically saying that, like, what's happening in the Ruhr region and all that kind of stuff was too much. Was because, remember, France took over the Ruhr because Germany didn't pay its reparations on time or something along those lines. And he was saying that, like, this was too much of a state of exception, that we need hard leadership that will completely throw out the rule book and just rule by decree and be just basically a monarch. Though Schmidt hated the Kaiser. But that
is the end game of that applied to the current situation is a permanent emergency, is the permanent state of exception that you're describing. And so that is the fear, is that, like, if the rails were truly off 100%, that's where we would be headed right now as a country. That maybe is where we're headed. I don't know.
Yeah.
It feels like it sometimes.
Right?
Yeah.
And the theory of rulership under a state of exception is the fear principle. But, like, there's a more subtle thing that which is still a fascist theory, but, like, it kind of just it works for really any kind of authoritarian government, is the idea of a cult of personality, originally coined by a futurist, different from fascism, but like a earlier thing that led into fascism. Yeah, basically, though also diverged pretty significantly later. But this idea of a cult of personality, that and it kind of aligns with Wilson's idea of a great orator, that you have this prime minister who rises in the ranks within the legislature because of how good of an orator they are, and eventually are able to kind of shape legislation and control simply by force of personality.
Mm-hmm.
That's the difference between Wilson and Marinetti, I think his name is. I could be getting that wrong. Person who was like the main editor for the People of Italy paper that Mussolini was running in 1919. But this guy founded futurism and all that kind of stuff. But, like, he also came up with this idea that, like, you need somebody who has the force of will, the power, sheer strength of personality to form a cult that will operate as that kind of great orator.
Mhm.
So a little bit different from the Wilsonian concept, but like it is foundational to fascism.
Right.
Obviously cult of personality can apply to basically anything, but like
It's almost like putting a name on something. It's like we need someone that everyone likes, or like that we need to build something around one person. It's like, well, okay, that's not.
yeah,
But as a
that's
theory of
why there's a
leadership,
difference between like fear of princip and cult of personality. But like the cult of personality seems to be like the most comparable thing to what Trump is doing.
I feel like the state of exception, but sure. I mean, cult of personality absolutely applies. And I think that ultimately what does, I believe, distinguish the Trump movement from the Führerprinzip in the White House is that, in the end, a lot of people have been brought into the White House in order to enable the president to get what he wants. But a lot of people have been brought in the White House in order to do things that other people want through Donald Trump. So
yeah, there's
the
a lot
Heritage
of
Foundation and Project 2025 is built to appeal to MAGA and to integrate itself, and it would probably sell itself as like the purest form of the MAGA movement, but in the end is its own thing, advocating its own path. And that
right
is done around the
have
cult of
butted heads with
personality.
Trump, especially in terms of judges.
Sure.
Like he went after them for their judge picks because some of their judges are their judge picks are now ruling against Trump.
Right. You also get the opposite end of that, where there are people outside of the heritage group that oppose from within the Republican Party. So I know that the new nominee for the Bureau of Labor Statistics is a heritage economist, whatever the hell that means. They're a hack. And on the flip side, there are people that are like, hey, Mr. President, it wouldn't be good for your agenda if you fudge the numbers with this person at the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And so there is obviously not an operating Führerprinzip within the entirety of Trump's apparatus, even though there is an increased number compared to the first term of people that are there to empower him. And that to me says that you are correct and that the cult of personality is the more applicable model than the Führerprinzip.
Yeah, and that's because I think it's also the kind of the people are getting really offended that I've been using the term fascist a bunch, and I think it's extremely applicable.
I also think it's not that well. No, sorry. Finish your point. I apologize.
But I think most people don't understand that it's not German fascism that I'm referring to. It's Italian. It's very obvious. Like, he's basically just Orange Mussolini.
And we talked the last time I was on about the Spanish Civil War and Franco. Was Franco technically a fascist or not?
Yeah.
And like historians often call Franco's movement the nationalist movement and not a fascist movement. And I don't want to delegitimize that whole conversation, but it's just to say that I agree with you. And I think we talked about last time that fascism is not some magical boogeyman word that like, if everyone could just be convinced it is fascism, that they'd all say, this is bad.
Yeah. No, I think
far more common and popular than people give it credit for. And there's no like using that word, even though it is sometimes hard to pin down, is nonetheless like, I don't think it's as uncommon as people want to believe it is. And it's not as powerful of a word to dissuade people of their beliefs than people who oppose fascism think.
Yeah.
So you're right to just use it because, I think you're correct. Like I think Italian fascism.
Yeah, I'm working on it. There's a reason why I could speak on Carl Schmitt now, and literally like last year, I didn't even know who the hell that was. Like I've been doing some research on this, like and like because really I made a video with Matt like in 2016, basically denouncing the comparisons to fascism, and I stand by that. He wasn't a fascist back then. He was a reactionary for sure, but he hadn't gone all the way to authoritarianism, and
the intellectual ideological underpinnings hadn't surrounded him yet.
He hadn't gotten into like replacement theory, white freaking genocide, the
hadn't
whole
tried an insurrection.
Yeah, the authoritarianism, freaking, and this kind of like radical ultranationalism. where it's about like a new man. You know,
Yeah.
that none of that existed in 2016.
You had the foundations, like I alone can fix it in his
Yeah.
RNC speech, but it wasn't there yet. You're correct. And and it is an important thing to point out over time. And I actually this week was considering a video just called "When Is It Fascism?"
That's kind of what my work is going towards. Like I haven't written it yet. I have a outline now.
Yeah.
I'm almost done reading for it. I've got a book and a half to read.
I look forward to it, and I think the reason that I have struggled with it and like put it back on the shelf and taking it back down is because I, number one, don't think it's necessarily it's hard to not just become hacky for me. It's hard to not be just a hack when writing it. And the broader point that I would make, which is that it is more common and it's not that big of a deal to just call it what it is, also undermines the entire point of creating a video like that for me. But it's like, well, if it's not a big deal, why did you make a video that's 30 minutes long? Yeah.
To me, it's just like, you know, I'm tired of having people say like, you know, quit being so alarmist. And it's like, no, it's this has actually kind of become the consensus among scholars is that this is fascism.
Yeah.
And like, that's why I have multiple fascist possibilities in this section. You know, state of exception, fear of principle, and cult of personality are all fascist principles. And and explicitly so. This isn't like a, you know, I don't know if it can. No, they're just, you know, they come from fascists to support fascism. And so that episode is more like, why have I come to this conclusion? You know, because like, you know, for the longest time, it's always like everything I dislike is Hitler kind of thing. Right.
God
But
wins
like,
law stuff.
yeah, but there's a certain point where it's like, you got to call a spade, and that's,
and not every form of fascism is German fascism.
Yeah.
And maybe thank God so, because the German fascism was, for all of its horrors and moral depravity, efficient at what it set out to do quite often, and in a way that like Italian fascism wasn't.
Yeah.
And like,
you got to look at like,
thank goodness.
you got to look at Franco. You got to look at freaking Pinochet. You got to look at freaking Putin. You know, you got to look at Saddam, or you know, there's so many examples.
Yeah. And you know, if there was an equivalent like proto-Stalinist regime or something crazy like that in the States, I wouldn't freak out if somebody pointed it out or tried to wrestle with the question of whether it was like Stalinism or totalitarianism. Like, I think these are legitimate questions to ask, especially in unprecedented times. And if it ages like milk because it was all wrong, then thank goodness that we live in a republic that recovered so well that we all look dumb for thinking we might be descending. Yeah.
Kind of, you know, kingfish and all that. Getting there.
Do you want to talk about the future?
Right. So we need to wrap this up. So the let's talk about why would any like, given that we have this massive expansion of power, and we have talked a little bit about like how some politicians really did just forsake power. They wanted to just be a presiding president. The namesake of the presidency is just to preside. So why would any politician willingly forsake power?
Because they exist in a context where that would be considered virtuous, but in general, or they are just truly exceptional people, perhaps. Those are the two possibilities in my mind. And
like, we got, you know, prime examples would be, you know, Harding, Jefferson. I don't quite agree with you on that, honestly.
Okay. As him being like an exceptional, like not the type 1, but type 2, the person who's just, I'm just going to do this because I think it's the correct thing.
Yeah, I don't think he really did that though.
Okay.
He did overstep his bounds in ways that were like setting an example for later. He was trying to set an example. That's true.
Sure.
But
Okay.
he absolutely was also like the Jay Treaty was such a freaking like mess of a letdown.
Mm.
His like his handling of the Whiskey Rebellion was necessary, but like did kind of show his willingness to execute rather to
You're correct. For me, it boils down to the two-term tradition and the not just taking power after the American Revolution. But you're correct.
But he died like 2 years later, so
Mhm.
he was just retiring. Also, the whole everybody thinks of that final speech from him, which isn't even written by him. It's written by Hamilton.
Mhm.
And
Most presidents don't write their speeches.
well, not only that, he didn't give it. It wasn't. It was just he didn't. It wasn't an actual speech.
It was a written address. Yeah.
Yeah. He didn't speak it, and he didn't write it, so it's not really his speech. And furthermore, it's Hamilton denouncing factionalism, sectionalism, and executive overreach, entangling treaties, and it's like.
Oh,
You got
Mr. Hamilton.
You
Yeah.
got the Jay Treaty. You got Federalists. You've got you've got a Southerner who's supposedly saying this. Like no, Washington was not being particularly generous by submitting that letter.
Mhm.
It was quite disingenuous.
I
don't
Yeah,
think
okay.
that Washington's a particularly good example of refusing power.
Okay. The ideal of Washington, then, and we can.
Yeah.
I'll let you have that one. To go to your broader question though, I think it is a function of place and time, and not usually a function of personality. Those special exceptions do exist, but I think of even like William Howard Taft, who, he didn't even want to be president. He was like, I always want to be on the Supreme Court. He still used power in a way that, in some ways surpassed Teddy Roosevelt.
Mhm.
And that was because
diplomacy was like so just not in the Constitution or anything.
Right.
Like he just
maybe
kinda
Calvin
did it.
Coolidge had a disposition that really just said like, this time and place allows for someone like me to actually just do what I want to do, and this is just my natural disposition. I don't think that time and place exists anymore. I think any president that tried to recreate that time and place would fail, because we have implemented a primary system. We have infused our way of selecting presidential candidates with a lot of democracy, and it brings people who are good in what the founders would call popular arts to the presidency, to the nomination, and then into the White House. And so that I think that's it. I think that's an irreversible development without, completely upending how we select candidates. And so I do think that ability to forsake power is disappearing, or is gone for the most part. But I know that the question was why, so I won't go further for now.
Yeah, so this is also about the future, right? Like this
Mhm.
is, why would, not why did, why
Mhm.
would.
Another reason would be, let's use the phrasing we used in the last section, state of exception. So let's imagine a new president, King Richard, the president, your cat, or Sophie as vice president, whatever. Let's say that their goal is to exist within the current paradigm, but eventually get us back to a much more balanced power structure in this country. How would they do it? They might do it by trying to use the bully pulpit of the White House to pursue aggressive reforms with a friendly Congress that would eventually check future presidents, that would eventually put things back in power by, I don't know, adding states to the union, expanding the House of Representatives, abolishing the filibuster. You could think of reforms that would eventually lead, or expanding the court. You could eventually think of reforms like that as being things that would bring the power of the presidency down in the medium and long term that would require a president to sign it that was willing to forsake that power eventually. But in order to get there, they would have to be, ironically, pretty big bully pulpit advocates of these reforms, probably in the context of a larger agenda of economic populism to make it happen. So it would be a specific set of circumstances within the paradigm that would eventually lead to a reduction in power.
Almost like a Cincinnatus, I guess.
Yeah, or you could say a sincere state of exception where you're like, we're gonna blow the lid off this thing, and we're gonna basically have a procedural revolution. We're gonna change the number of people in the House and the Senate by adding states. We're going to reduce the filibuster. We're going to get rid of the filibuster. We're going to do X, Y, and Z. We're going to expand the court. And these things will then create a more responsive Congress that will be more able to check and oversee. It will create courts that are more able to take the power that they took for themselves with judicial review. We are going to basically create imperial Congress and imperial courts.
Yeah, I don't know if Congress having more people in it would equal a more responsive Congress, because it kind of has coincided with the especially in terms of like adding states rather than like busting the cap on representative numbers, because I think it's currently sitting at like the average representative represents like 500,000 people or something like that. It's
right.
Insane.
Yeah. Abolishing gerrymandering and adding to the states would at least make Congress more representative. Whether it would cure gridlock, I don't know.
Yeah. And like I did a whole thing on like what is to be done, directly referencing Lenin actually, but like he's
a modest reformer. What would he do? No.
And I like Photoshop my head on top of like Teddy Roosevelt doing the like thing.
Oh, cool.
As the thumbnail. And like I had a whole bunch of things on that, but like that was all largely about changing Congress. Here it's more about like if a Democrat takes office, like think about like Joe Biden, who basically went, I'm just going to be another Obama, but like late term Obama, not freaking like active let's fix healthcare Obama. He basically did relinquish power.
Did he?
I didn't think about it. Like most of what he did was try to undo what Trump did, and then essentially just deal with the pandemic, which was basically just following through with Trump's policies on that.
I mean, did he expand the powers of the presidency? I don't know. Did he fundamentally do something? So let's think about it. In order to reverse a lot of what Trump did, he had to sign a bunch of executive orders in a way that was more, I think he signed more than Trump, who signed more than Obama, in order to get Build Back Better or whatever it became, eventually watered down after Sinema and Manchin had their say. He had to be a bully pulpit president, advocate an agenda. I think Biden
he definitely advocated an agenda. What I'm saying is that he didn't expand the power of the presidency. What
about the student loan? Would that not be?
That's actually a good point. Yeah. That was an attempt, but it didn't happen, right?
Right. And so, but my point was just that he was more of a salesman of the return to normalcy rather than the enactor of the return to normalcy.
I mean, you could say the same thing about Harding.
Yeah, exactly.
Harding had Teapot Dome and everything.
I think your point has merit. I just that's just the subtlety I would add is like I don't know if he expanded it, but he certainly wasn't. If he is Obama too, well, Obama expanded it, at least tried to, and Trump expanded it.
That's why I said late term.
Yeah. And then the pardon power thing as well. I think the late in his term pardon power stuff was pretty wild.
Was like also his like attempt to just like proclaim the ERA and it has passed is no.
Yeah.
Everybody just kind of Like
Yeah.
I think a lot of people have kind of forgotten that
I
happened.
I did forget it until you just referenced it.
Yeah,
I remember
that's
Kamala being like, "We did it, Joe." Not she said that with the election, but
Yeah,
basically
but, like,
tweeted, "We did it, Joe. We
yeah,
passed the
it's
Equal Rights Amendment." You're like,
it's
"What?"
just like, no, you didn't. The time limit is long over.
It's incredible. What was and that ultimately is to get a little bit more brass tacks about and reveal my bias. Like if it's not incredibly obvious, like I am a maybe a social democrat of like the European vibe, and I'm thinking ahead to like what will actually be effective going forward. And even if that involves some difficult choices about leaning into some of these things that have been taken, like how can we eventually navigate ourselves back to sanity and a little more balance? Does that mean we need to do we need a president who will come in and bulldoze and use Congress to create the Imperial Congress and the Imperial Courts and like really force a balance of power with the knowledge that the presidency is never going back in time to Calvin Coolidge? It will be a Trumpian president from now until that is forcibly altered.
You're bringing up the final question perfectly. Does presidential power only expand, or can it retract?
In the American context, I promised two answers. I will give two answers. 2 hours and 40 minutes ago, I said I had two answers.
I tried to keep it under 2 hours, but
it's okay. All good. I do need to use the bathroom if we take questions before. I just need to pee. But
we haven't actually had any super chats, so
okay. I'm sorry, but we haven't earned your money yet, folks. But I'm going to take off my shirt at some point if we don't get any super chats. So I'll do whatever it takes to get a tip. In any event, what the hell was I saying? Oh, the first answer is that the power of the presidency was always big, and that the Supreme Court decision in Trump v. United States in 24 talking about the prerogative powers of the presidency was just saying the quiet part out loud, and that those powers were always there. And so it didn't expand. It's just always been big. That's one answer to the question. It's obviously unsatisfying. The second answer is more satisfying, which is that it only expands, but it does ebb and flow. So if it's a graph like the stock market, it has ups and downs, but it's generally going up.
Thank you, Lady Ashmaker. You're the first one. Woo! Take it off. Somebody on your thing's like, just pee in a bottle.
This is not a factory farm. I won't be doing that.
This is an Amazon.
Yeah.
But yeah, but there's been this thing that we kept on hitting on that's actually kind of making me rethink the way I think about this. Is that how do I phrase it? That the iron fist can more easily fit back into the velvet glove.
Right.
Like that power once exercised is more easy to bring back. So while we might nominally return to lesser executive function, like we might have some sort of like anti-Trump reforms like we did with Nixon, then the next person 20 years down the line will figure out a new way of abusing the system and take it even further, right?
Yeah.
So this is actually kind of an interesting way. And we got another one. Thank you, Jennifer. Who we got that, because I hadn't actually thought of it this way, because I really wanted to think of it as like, that it is kind of like a roller coaster, that there's ups and downs. It is generally trending towards more power towards the executive over time, but like we've had times of retraction and we've had times of expansion, and like it generally trends towards expansion, but it doesn't always. But when you think of it in terms of like whether or not that expansion can just snap back into place, after a retraction. That seems to be the case. I mean, we're not. I was about to say we're not about to turn an entire race, but actually we kind of are.
And we're not about to have Wilson's Goonies like arresting people who speak ill of the president, but those vibes are out there. I mean, we had you mentioned the slap lawsuits and a lot of the stuff, the media suit lawsuits, and like there's a tinge of that. It looks a lot more like Orban than Wilson, but it's there.
What's weird there is that it's not a law that he's exploiting. Like this Espionage and Sedition Acts were laws.
Mm-hmm.
He's just using executive authority to silence people, but like it can't silence me.
No, not yet. And I mean, but I'm not an alarmist saying like we're gonna get the
this
live
is on
streams
your channel, by the way.
Oh, cool.
Somebody Canadian.
Yes, we are about to become the next province of Canada, as opposed to Canada becoming the 51st state. I actually have considered like a goofy video. Like, obviously, I didn't make it because it's just a little too goofy. But like, what if California, New York, Oregon, Washington State just like seceded and became provinces of Canada, as opposed to the reverse?
There's been this long thing of like it's called Cascadia, and this idea that Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia would all secede and form their own country. And it's one of those silly things, kind of like, like Albertan separatism. Like there's people who, like to threaten it, but it's not a real thing.
No, our good friend JJ McCullough had a video on that a couple weeks ago.
That's why I'm thinking of it.
To answer your question in a more serious way, a beautiful, full little fool. In terms of, I know that you're just asking a little bit jokingly, but part of the reason that I moved back from abroad to the USA is because I found myself feeling alien from my home country. I did not feel like I understood. I moved back after the 2016 election. And to me, it was important to be here, even if I have become more cynical over my time in Washington and have stopped believing that I can make a large difference. I still hold this identity of being an American and fighting for the good. And I take myself seriously as an American. I'm not a nationalist, just to be clear, but I am someone who if this is going to be a political project, if we are going to have nation states and borders and people and democracy and republic, like I want to be part of making the one that I have come to know and that has given me lots of good things in my life. It's an honest chance to I just want to be part of it. So that's the real answer to your question that was meant as a joke.
Yeah. And for me, I literally fought for this country. So, but I'm actually coming more and more around to like, maybe I should be looking at like professorships outside the country.
Sure.
I'd be functioning as an expat, I wouldn't be looking
dual citizen or as
I mean, like dual citizenship, fine, but if I have to renounce my American citizenship, that would never happen.
Right.
But like, Canada, you absolutely can have. I don't know about dual citizenship, but like being an expat there, that's easy. You just drive across the border. I'd be fine with being a professor there.
And to be clear as well, like when I look at like one of the first things that was one of the first public policies as part of my political awakening was healthcare. And this naive thought that I had, like, if I could just convince people that, universal healthcare is cheaper and leads to better outcomes, obviously then the American system would adopt a universal healthcare system. And, part of the public policy comparison classes that you take in undergrad and grad school are like looking just one for one at other systems. And I'm not, taking the best and worst. So like, the NHS in the UK or the Canadian healthcare system with its single payer provincial system, or the French single payer system, or Japan, whatever. It goes on and on and on. But I would
less
just,
than us though.
yeah, I did want to just add that, I'm not discounting becoming a Canadian because I think there's no merit to Canada. I value the self-determination, to use a Wilsonian term, of the Canadian people to not be the 51st state, and to have public policies that are different.
They couldn't be the 51st state. They'd have to be multiple states.
Yeah,
if we're going to take them over, just do it right.
And what about the First Nations? And
we know how to deal with them
identity
quite well.
and good Lord, yeah.
Well, actually, look, we were quite terrible to our domestic dependent nations, as the legal term is, but they basically followed us, but did it for longer. Like
those school scandals were not that old when they came out.
It's the last of those officially required. Now, mind you, Indian schools still exist both in Canada and the United States. I mean, I live, what is that? 1.2 miles away from a road called Indian School Road, because there was an Indian school there. And part of UNM's campus was a land grant Indian school. But our system of mandatory Indian schools ended in 1934. Theirs ended in 1996.
Oh, that is a number. I was alive.
Yeah. We're both alive while it was still going on in Canada.
It's like, I remember in undergrad learning that Lawrence v. Texas was decided. That's the court decision of sodomy laws.
Yeah, it's like 2007.
I think it was 2003 or 2007. I just remember thinking like that. It must have been 2003 because I remember learning about it in like 2009 or something when I was in undergrad. And I remember being like, that. What the hell? That wasn't that long ago. That was anyway.
I mean, you remember Obergefell v. Hodges, right? 2003.
I recently wrote a Substack piece on citizenship. I was writing about Henry David Thoreau's civil disobedience, and one of the things I talked about towards the end was my own reckoning in my own little life of realizing that, like, it's something that every child that becomes an adult and thinks about these things eventually realizes, which is that when you're a child, the world feels like it's built for you. It feels like your story, you're the main character, and everyone else is like an NPC. And
the world revolves around you.
Right. And becoming a teenager is about becoming your own self, which is how it's usually described. But it's also about realizing, coming to reckoning with like the outside world, and that it doesn't revolve around you. And for my political awakening, it was about, as I have gotten older, it was about realizing that the injustices that existed when I was born, that they ran parallel to me. They weren't necessarily caused by me, and they might continue to run parallel to me even after I've ceased to exist. And there's no longer any parallel. I'm just gone. And that's one of the reasons why it is important to me to remain an American and to remain part of at least flailing in the dark to try to make the world a better place, even if I don't know how to make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, like, I have, and I don't want to get too deep here, but like, I've been having a lot of videos just not perform well, and I'm currently I didn't get any classes this semester, so this is my main job now, and and like the school just started this week, and I'm not teaching, and basically they downsized all the adjuncts because
which adjuncting was already kind of a
precarious. I was supposed to become a teacher in the Clark County School District, but they had a reduction in force, and then they wanted to only hire from people who got reduced, so I didn't make that cut. Also, they probably don't want to hire a doctor because the pay rate for that is $108K starting.
It's pretty good.
Yeah. But
it's frustrating.
But yeah, that means that I'm just kind of stuck here. And I'm not a big fan of Albuquerque or anything, but it was kind of this like realization of like, but I'm doing what I love anyways.
Yeah.
Is I'm pushing through. I don't care if it's getting less and less views. Like I just want to make it.
Mhm.
To push it to put that message out there.
To make the thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
I not to make it about me, but I empathize a lot because I feel the same way, that my channel's had its ups and downs. Part of it's absolutely been my own inconsistency and lack of branding consistency, etc. But in the end, like, I make what I make because I must.
Yeah.
I must create in some way. It doesn't have to be YouTube, but I feel this
It's become your
eternal
outlet.
pull to inform in a way that makes people think, and to just try to let my curiosity inspire other people. And I am well intentioned in doing that. And that's why in the end, like when I had a burnout a couple weeks ago and decided like, all right, it's just not going to work no matter how much I bang my head against the wall, and decided to stop, editing as heavy and to just make things, that it felt quite liberating. And also, it's also why I didn't walk away and just say, F this.
Yeah.
Like, it's because I think you and I have that in common, is that we truly care, and that there's a, it's not mere pleasure. It is actually a fundamental part of our identity and our being to like make things and to put information.
To be creative.
Yeah.
And like I started off as an architecture major. Like, I just wanted to make things, and
Yeah.
YouTube became my creative outlet.
Yeah.
But to get this back on this and kind of connected actually, is that like the reason for this stream, a lot of people are pointing out like this, what a hell of a time to even ask this question. Does presidential power only expand? And we had this like kind of deeper philosophical thing of like, well, and like it's like a rubber band. You stretch it too many times and it gets easier to stretch out, right?
Yeah.
The velvet glove thing where it's like the iron fist is easier to fit into a velvet glove once already emplaced. But like, while we can't stop this crazy train that we're on, we can talk about it, and that's kind of the point here. And I don't know about you, but I honestly have actually like changed my thought on that, because like this idea that like power actually doesn't really ever go away. It just kind of fades into the background. It retracts temporarily.
Mm-hmm.
It never fully retracts.
We're experiencing our 250th anniversary as a country soon, and if you look at countries,
the Lexington and Concord have already happened.
Yeah. If you think about, I know a book that you know well because I think you're the one that inspired me to read it, Imagined Communities, about the nation state. I don't want to fall into the trap of just. I don't want to fall into the trap of nationalism, but if you look at places with longer histories than ours, you do see, just to take England for example, you see like a glorious revolution. You see the ebbs and flows of kings and emperors in Rome, and you see, what's his face, William the Conqueror, and you see.
I don't like Great Britain as an entity came about in 1707. Like.
Sure.
It's barely older than us.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay, let me modify my point. It was just more to say that,
if
like,
we're going to include like the Magna Carta or William the Conqueror, then that's our history too.
Yes. Let me rephrase. What I'm trying to get at is to buttress your point, which is to say that you're correct that there is in the history of our country, yes, is what I'm trying to say to you. And you have to take a longer view to find something different, where like actual polities come into existence and disappear, to find examples where it doesn't necessarily follow that pattern that we've identified. So you have to look beyond the 250 years of the United States and look towards, centuries of history, like true multi-centuries and millennia of human history, to find the fact that things rise and fall. And I'm not talking about cycles of history, just that, you know, the fundamental change where like institutions themselves become something else takes a longer period of time. But in the general dynamics of our country, of the United States, I still hold the contention that that expansion is only redacted or only retracts in the form of latency, and it's always lying there to be taken and picked up and carried further and to go further, unfortunately.
Well, that's I mean, that's actually an interesting way to think of it, because and I don't want to extend this any further than we have to, but you know, that you know that the expansion of power always is capable of coming back, doesn't mean that the retraction isn't real.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's okay. that's an like, and this is why I like having these conversations.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because
Warren Harding was a real president, even if he was part of a, you know, what we would describe on balance as latency or a retraction. He was real. And the, you know, the other example that we could give. By
the way, I have to say, Aaron, I'll get to your comment in just a second. You know,
okay,
but it's off topic.
the presidents after the Reconstruction as well. It's like the power moved. It was still there. It was latent in the presidency, and it moved to the Congress. It moved to the oligarchs, or whatever we want to call the Gilded Age barons and
oligarchs. I like robber barons.
Robber barons. Yeah, that's a good word. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what do you think Elon Musk is?
He's richer than the Vanderbilts and the Carnegies and the.
Not the Rockefellers.
Is he? Okay, I think he's flirting with it. He might
be getting there. Yeah.
He counts as the point. He certainly counts. We are living in a, and I know that Matt always talks about this. And when Matt Beat, our friend who runs the Mr. Beat channel, I'm sure you know him because he's more famous than both of us. When he talks about, you know, this era of politics and potential solutions, he often talks about the Gilded Age and the and just what would a response look like in that era. And I won't speak for him further, but I do think that that's a valuable way to look at our history. It's not to, as you always say, when we're talking about the profession of being a historian, which I am not, but we're talking about using history in that way. There's obviously pitfalls, but I do think that
can be a historian just by publishing it.
These eras can be a useful mnemonic for us to consider what kind of things might function and work in our era, and that's not necessarily a vice.
So, trying to figure out a way to wrap it all up, because, and I think I just got to kind of summarize what we've talked about, because we've been on quite a journey. We talked about you know, the way that power has expanded throughout the centuries within the American public, but also how it is retract. We've talked about, you know, for instance, the expansion because of Reconstruction, but also the retraction of it. And a lot of these things are like that people have refused power, and other times they've been, you know, the situation necessitated the expansion of power. But ultimately, there's a real difference between Trump 1.0 and Trump 2.0, where, you know, there was plenty of tyranny in Trump 1.0. There's been tyranny in basically every president since FDR. I shouldn't say since. How do you say since, including? since Hoover.
There's actually a German way to say it, but I won't do that.
Trying to remember it now, but anyways, and you know, everyone has had some sort of tyranny, but like 2.0 was quite the jump,
mm-hmm.
In a way that we didn't really see coming.
Mm-hmm.
Like even all the, like, he's a fascist. Like I remember I tweeted during the Capitol insurrection, is like, first thing I tweeted is like, looks like 1922 Italian styles back in fashion. And then like at the end of the day, oh, it looks like it was just Munich a year later. What does that mean for a decade from now? I don't know.
And that's an important distinction, I think, and that'd be my final word on the matter, which is that the difference between the political scientist and the hard scientist is that quite often the hard scientist doesn't desire necessarily what's going on in the test tube to be one way or another. They're theoretically, they're inquisitors of reality. And a lot of times in the social sciences, we also take up that aura of the scientist and say we're just looking and investigating. But in the end, I think political science is also about finding what can work and how things work in order to do things with that knowledge.
Yeah.
And I think that in the future, the way that we're theoretically examining this period of time should not be used in a manner where we just keep our head in the books and just consider, like, how could we define this expansion of power or this retraction of power? I think the useful questions in the short term and the medium term are what is changing, and if we would do differently, and how would we do differently, and to what end would we do differently is the most important question about these things. So if there are going to be new powers of the presidency, even if we long-term desire those new powers to fade away or to be contested by other branches of government, it is useful to ask, to what end will we use those powers ourselves? I don't believe it's useful to ask, how will we try to put the genie back in the bottle unilaterally?
Yeah.
And it's an unfortunate question to ask, but it is the question that I would ask is, how do we find virtuous leaders to do things with the powers that are created that will further the American project and perhaps put us back on a path towards normalcy, not in terms of policy, but in terms of procedure.
All right. I think that's a good way to end it. Well, I have one more super chat I need to ask. Answer that's completely off topic. If you want to jump off, that's cool. But I'll
stay. It's all good.
Aaron was saying, if you want to teach, go to Stockton. Stockton's really changed a lot. Very gentrified place, which, gentrification is
more tax revenue for your
supposedly a bad thing, but here it's like I wouldn't want to teach in Stockton of the 2000s, but like Stockton now I'd be fine with. My problem is I don't have California has a very strong you have to go through another year of college to get your teaching certificate. I don't want to do that. I don't want to deal with another year of graduate school.
Oh man, I feel that. I'm like, I don't want any more certificate. Like just give me the damn job.
I have letters after my name now. I don't need another.
Yeah.
There are some ARL programs in certain districts in California that kind of like usurp it, but like California law is kind of clear that that's not actually legal. So there's some districts that just allow you to usurp the law, but like, yeah, I don't want to deal with all of that. Plus, I want to go home. If I was going to go back to California, it would be San Luis Obispo. Like that, that's my home. I was born there. I love SLO. I'm going to be there for the week before Thanksgiving. I'll be there. We're doing a big family meetup there. Because I haven't been in SLO since 2023, so 2 years. Hell, I haven't even touched the ocean in 2 years. Jeez.
Oh man. Well, if you ever come this way, we'll go to Assateague National Seashore. It's a very affordable campground. It's a national park and a stateside park from Maryland, and it's oceanfront camping right there. It's very affordable, and there's just gorgeous, and it's a great way for anyone who is willing to get online at the right time to grab up those reservations to see the ocean without having to pay the price of like an oceanfront hotel room or something.
Wait, Stockton still? Last time I was in Stockton, it wasn't that bad. Like it looked like Stockton used to actually be the car theft capital of the U.S. Guess where it is now?
I do know that for some teachers,
ta-da! I'm in it. I live here.
I was just going to point out that some school districts, it depends on how dire their needs are, but some of them will like hire you under the assumption you'll work towards something because
Yeah.
there's a
Well,
shortage.
that's what. So I have a what's called an alternate route to licensure certificate for my school district back in Las Vegas, the Clark County School District, but it just fell through because of the whole rift.
Yeah.
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 But as Aaron said, yeah, slow is lovely. I got my master's at Cal Poly, and even I guess did a gap year. It's not like I chose to, but like had a gap year, because the place is just amazing. I love slow. But I'm afraid we went way over time. I was trying to go for 2 hours.
That's okay. I enjoyed the conversation a lot, and I don't know if I said it on air or only off air, but like my thinking is evolving on the question, not just of whether it expands or retracts, but my thinking is
How
going
to
towards
use it.
how to use it. Yeah, and I find myself troubled by that as well, because I am not naturally, like, I'm more of a natural classical liberal than, you know, whatever. I'm like, the most effective way to swing an axe is not my forte, and I want to wrestle with these questions with someone I know is thoughtful, and so I appreciate that we've had 3 hours to do it together. It's been fun.
And honestly, I've kind of changed on the answer to this question. I think it's still like it can, but like that it can has become even more nuanced.
Unfortunately, with so much in academia, or for the benefit, the more you learn, the more subtle your views tend to get. The absolute sits steal in absolutes.
That's a good place to end it.
Thomas Jefferson.
All right. Thanks everybody. I hope you guys learned a bit and kind of, at least with me, kind of expanded your view on this. Thanks for joining us, and have a good afternoon, everybody.
Everybody.